What's good, y'all? How we doing? So, as you guys can see, this is another compilation. This is the trappers, the smugglers, the trap economy, the history of trapping in different cities and states. We cover a number of different cities. This is, a little kind of mini series I did within the Trap Tree series. It covered Miami, Seattle, Atlanta, Chicago, DC, Oklahoma. We cover the history and the kind of some of the current systems that are put in place right now about the illicit market. It's a really interesting series. Highly recommend you guys watch this if you guys haven't seen these. Big shouts out to everyone that has already seen them. Big shouts out to everyone that's been supporting. This is another compilation, but we're gonna have a bunch of new, fresh content coming out here real soon. Anyways, guys, big shouts out to all my trappers, smugglers, pushers trying to make it, trying to get it. Always remember, trapping's really just a stepping stone. But also, trapping and the illicit market in general and whatever it is, very critical in terms of an overall city's, economy. Also, guys, make sure you guys go subscribe to the High Design streaming platform. Go become a member. You can do that for free. You can go to www.highdesign.media. Go sign up for free. There's also a paid version. Also, make sure to go follow us on Twitter, Instagram, all that good shit. Anyways, guys, appreciate you guys so much. Hope you guys enjoy. This is the Trap Economies of America.
The U.S. has its fair share of issues when it comes to illicit flower, but in other places around the world, this plant grows in the wild, a potential infrastructure proliferated by Mother Nature. My father was actually born and raised in Kampala, Uganda in the 1950s and 1960s, and he would tell me stories about how this plant would grow in the wild throughout the country, and that they actually used to feed the cows flower because it grew in such abundance. And this is the case for a number of different countries in Africa. Yet in America, we always think of places like Colombia in terms of hotspots for illicit market imports. That's probably because during the golden era of smuggling in the 70s, up to 70% of all illicit flower that entered the US came from that one country alone, and that of Colombia. But when we pan out to the global illicit market, there is a clear leader located in Africa. To put this into perspective, according to the United Nations Office of Substance and Crime, in 2004, 99% of all flower consumed in Ireland was actually grown in South Africa. Meanwhile, South Africa is only ranked third out of all of Africa's illicit flower producers. But who's number one? Welcome to another episode in the Trap Tree series, which is a sub-series of the High Design History series. And in this episode, we're going to explore Africa's global activity throughout its various regions and how it became the global leader in illicit flower exports. Please make sure to hit the like button, share this, subscribe, comment down below, and follow me on all the social medias. You can also join our Discord, and Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. All those links are going to be down below in the description. Anyways, this is LMC. Let's run it. Still, there are countries on the west side of Africa, like Ghana and Nigeria, that are seeing illicit imports. In 2014, Ghana was the #1 consumer of flower in the world. Nigeria, Africa's most populated nation, has more recently risen into the top 3. Flower is obviously illegal in both countries, but high population numbers demanding illicit product is a formula for a extremely lucrative and high illicit market activity, especially when it comes to importing. We are definitely seeing shipments being sent into Western African countries from American continental markets. The overproduction in the legal markets spill into both local and global black and gray markets. This actually opens up the potential for future legal markets. You'll already find fake packs with branding from companies that operate outside of these countries being propagated in these regions. Sometimes these are illicit market individuals who are looking to up the price of their local grown flower. Other times it's actually companies coming into the market looking to build their infrastructure ahead of time by collaborating with local growers and stamping them with their branding to start gaining recognition and loyalty in that specific region or area of the world. However, it's looking like this would be mainly the exporting rather than importing. Now, before we go on, I just want to thank our friends over at getseedsrighthere.com. Get 10% off your entire order at getseedsrighthere.com by using my code LMC10 at checkout. Get high quality clones and seeds at getseedsrighthere.com. Make sure to use my code LMC10. Now let's jump back into the video. So by the end of 2023, the legal market in Africa is expected to expand past $7 billion of the total $350 billion global market. It's been a slow start, but a new style of legalization has entered the market that could expose Africa to direct exploitation from foreign markets. In 2021, Rwanda followed the same path as Uganda, where both countries legalized the cultivation of medical flower only for the purpose of exporting. With only exporting and no internal sales or use allowed, this created a formula to continue to criminalize its own population while allowing foreign companies to enter into business with most of the labor done by the same citizens you would criminalize for that same business. Uganda gave out its first license in 2012. This went to an Israeli company, Together Pharma, who partnered with the Ugandan firm Industrial Hemp. This highlights two things. One, the Ugandan people aren't the ones who are benefiting from this. It's only the firms or corporations that are well established that are able to afford these licenses in the first place. I've seen med licensing in Africa ranging between $30,000 and $50,000, already well outside of the range of Ugandan farmer and agricultural workers. But to start growing and exporting out of Uganda, you're looking at $5 million for capital with a bank guarantee of $1 million. And this creates an incentive to partner with a foreign entity that is established in the market, such as Israel, who is in one of the global leaders in the plant's research. Now, two, even if the firm or corporation is Ugandan, it's in their best interest to partner with foreign entities in the situation of export-only trade. Doing so ensures that you consistently have your marketing, distribution, and infrastructure that you need to do business on a large scale. Meanwhile, your company simply provides the labor for cultivation and processing. Now, Africa's history with foreigners and flower goes back for centuries. The mid-12th century is when it's believed that the Arab traders were the ones who first introduced the plant to Africa after it had migrated from its origins in Asia. By the 15th century, the plant was spread as an indigenous Bantu nation migrated into South and Central Africa. By the mid-19th century, flower, or daga, as it became more commonly known as, was fully embraced by white Dutch settlers who found its purpose for medicine and recreation. In the end of the 19th century brought in the British Empire, who were looking for cheap or free labor to expand their global colonization. And after World War I, they began importing slaves from India, who were smuggling their own phenotypes, mainly consisting of smaller, bushier plants that were easier to conceal, leading to what became known as indica. Now, these plants didn't originate from India. That's just what Jean-Baptiste Lamarck called them, thinking that they were from there. But slap a Latin name on it to make it sound scientific, and voila, you have your new classification that has nothing to do with its true history. And this would only be the beginning of the foreign influence on the plant in Africa. Many of the Dutch settlers were also tobacco smokers, and before then, Africans consumed their daga mostly by drinking or eating. Now, however, it didn't take long for the Dutch to spread their tobacco smoking combustion method instead. I won't argue what's better, but we can all agree that the way you consume can alter its effects. So they essentially had changed the way the culture interacted with the plant. However, nothing would change this interaction more than when the British started seeing any workers that use the plant as lazy, insolent, and likely to go insane and slow down the entire workforce. Sounds familiar, right? Meanwhile, the warriors of the Zulu nation in South Africa were widely known to use the plant to enhance their ability to fight and counter mental stress before entering battle. Authorities were having discussions relating directly to race and the plant. With the Indians, they were rapidly approaching the same numbers as the British colonists in the 1900s. There was fear of violence or uprising from their indentured workers, and meanwhile, more and more of the white population was becoming more urbanized with African culture, and the plant was at the root of the bridge. In 1925, Indian hemp was added to the list of dangerous substances by the Advisory Committee Council of the League of Nations, and this was done by requests submitted by lawmakers in South Africa. And South Africa has a deep-rooted history of, obviously, racism. Institutionalized racial segregation, apartheid, continued for decades in the 90s. During this time, committees were put together to analyze the racial groups and their interactions with the plant. The report of the Interdepartmental Committee of the Abuse of Daga in 1952 gave law enforcement the power to seize homes, vehicles, and property with presumed guilt. In 1971, the Abuse of Dependence Producing Substances and Rehabilitation Act categorized the plant as Schedule 1, meaning it was an undesirable, dangerous, and dependence-producing hallucinogen with no medical benefits. This is obviously being influenced heavily by the United States, right? And by 1992, though, right, no scientific study could be done with the plant. However, with legalization, South Africa has become Africa's largest medical flower market, bringing in over $500 million, with many Western and European companies looking to outsource their cultivation here. Located near the Tropic of Capricorn, South Africa provides a rich cultivation climate enticing for foreigners. What's worse is that the problem with Ugandan's legalization is actually occurring with South Africa, even though their citizens are legally allowed to grow and consume flower. And for one, the South African government has been described as an octopus with many arms that don't really communicate with each other. And this leads to lawmakers making opposing policies and decisions at the different stages and levels of government enforcement. So your local police station might be following different rules than the one next to the city or the next region over. Especially because the laws are incredibly vague and unclear. For example, you're allowed to grow and consume, but there's no specific mention of exactly how many plants you can have or how much weight or the potency. It's just a generic rule that allows any law enforcement to say you have over the limit based on their own personal opinion. You're lucky to get any paperwork whatsoever, as there typically isn't even a court appearance. And even if you somehow can afford to take legal action, the court typically throws the case out, and this absolutely tarnished the future of the legal market here. And how can the people trust their government after they legalize a plant that they continue to arrest them for? Very conflicting, right? And this doesn't just slow down the consumption, but also the production of the legal market, with less people wanting to take the financial risk to invest in a business that could get shut down tomorrow. Because of this, the ones who don't play by the rules continue to survive. This area has land that is too promising to pass up for some farmers, especially in areas like the infamous Swaziland in Eswatini. The landlocked country between South Africa and Mozambique, this is the home of Swazi Gold, a rare sativa phenotype with no CBD. This highlights the importance of IP in the flower market with Africa's plants. However, foreign companies like Stellenbosch are using tissue culture technology to extract and send these genetics to Europe and the Middle East, Switzerland, and Israel in particular. The advantage of tissue culture compared to seeds or even cloning is that you can multiply the plant without pathogens, viruses, or infectious diseases, right? You kind of repair the genetics, right? So in a sense, these plants could possibly be even better than what you would find in Africa by the time they are cultivated by foreign entities. Meanwhile, because the plant is still illicit in this region, law enforcement has been raining poison from helicopters onto the farmers' crops. This doesn't just affect illicit plants, this affects all of agriculture. Many of the illicit farmers are generational, literally paying for their clothes, food, and education to survive. What's even more curious, because of the propaganda against the plant, hardly any of the growers are actually consumers. Foreign influence is clear when we see that most of the population is Roman Catholic or Protestant Christians. But with police literally poisoning their land, these people are turning to criminal activity beyond growing flower to make ends meet. The result's been an increase in overall crime and poverty. The natural resources in this area have nearly been exhausted, and Eswatini is on the verge of economic collapse. But out of all the countries in the world, the largest producer of illicit flower is located across the Mediterranean Sea from Spain, which is Morocco. Its location alone plays a major role. It's just off the Tropic of Cancer with an ideal climate for production in its proximity to Europe. The Middle East and direct access to Americans via the Atlantic Ocean makes it an international flower hub. 40% of the workforce is in agriculture, being the world's leading producer in olives and almonds as well. Similar to actually California with almonds. Now, Morocco is also the world's largest hashish producer, providing Europe with 70% of its product. To put into perspective how much flower Morocco produces, we know that Moldova in Europe is the second largest, and Morocco produces 3 times more flower than Moldova. Most of the flower is grown in the Rif Mountain region, where the land is most fertile. Originally, the Rif tribes were allowed to grow flower, but in 1956, with the independence of Morocco, the plant became prohibited. During the 60s and 70s, Western tourism brought an increased demand for flower. So the local tribes began expanding from small personal grows into full-scale farms that produces more illicit flower than any cartel. Still, not everyone wants to grow or even can grow, which is why current legislation in Africa typically discriminates against its citizens. For example, the Hayes Club in South Africa was a private club that allowed people to collectively grow and consume together. However, the courts decided the definition of private actually means that the person who cultivated the plant is the only person that can consume it. However, this creates an unconstitutional absurdity which denies any paraplegic or people incapable of farming for themselves to have access to the plant. These are typically the people who need it most. Now, before we go on with the story, I just want to mention one more time again. Thank you to our friends over at GetSeedsRightHere.com. Get 10% off your entire order at GetSeedsRightHere.com and support the show by using my code LMC10 at checkout. Get high quality clones and seeds at GetSeedsRightHere.com. Now, let's jump back into the video. So, the future of Africa's flower market has high potential to either transform the continent into a world leader in the legal market that creates generational wealth for their communities, or repeat the history of exploitation of the people and culture for foreign benefit. To be fair, it makes sense to partner with foreign companies that can provide the infrastructure that companies in Africa might not be able to afford or have expertise in, but at the same time, it would be great to see an African company or companies develop into the providers for African infrastructure instead. It would also be great to see a higher level of inclusion for the legacy farmers. It's estimated there are close to 1 million of these farmers, and flower advocacy groups are demanding more African brands by Africans. Some good news in 2023 is that there are now incubation programs being developed for small, medium, and macro entities in Africa. And there are currently around 20 companies going through the process, which should help them with licensing and global networking to get started. Programs like these can either push these companies to work more directly with their communities or to collaborate more with foreign markets and brands. Hopefully, Africa is able to find a balance between the two. Now, if you skew too hard, only working with your community, then you eliminate the global market potential and vice versa. Perhaps one of the best possible solutions would actually be the cousin to flower hemp. Africa possibly has the biggest potential to dominate the global hemp production market, and hemp is an ideal plant that can be grown all across Africa. Like I said, it definitely grows wild there in certain areas. And since only about 13.2% of Africa's population consumes flower, it would make sense to start producing something that they actually would use themselves. In fact, new technology could lead to, hemp oil replacing plastic. If that were to happen, any country committed to its production is almost guaranteed to see the boost in their economy. And this wouldn't be in any competition with any illicit or gray markets. You wouldn't have police poisoning your fields, and you would have multiple industries to tap into with the variety of textiles and products that can be derived from hemp. However, in order to do this, we'll need to see countries in Africa raise their THC tolerance levels up to 1% instead of the 0.02%, which eliminates even hemp from being produced. At 1%, Africa can begin cultivating and manufacturing hemp. But only time will tell. Let's see how this all turns out down the road. Now, comment your opinions down below. Make sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't by now, and check out our full Trap Treaty series playlist next. And anyways, please make sure to hit the like button. Like I said, join the socials, join the Discord, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and all the other platforms. The links are down below in the description. Big shouts out to all the folks watching from any country in Africa. I can't wait to visit some of those countries in the great continent of Africa very soon. And if you're watching from any of those countries in Africa, don't hesitate to tap in with your boy. Hit me via email or DM. Anyways, this is LMC. Signing out. The birthplace of the term trap itself takes us back into the history of southern rap and hip-hop culture of the early 2000s. Rappers like T.I. and Young Jeezy released projects that made trap mainstream with albums like T.I.'s Trap Music in 2003 and Jeezy's Trap or Die mixtape series, which started in 2005. Also, notable mention, Gucci Mane and his whole succession of rappers that came under him. But in the words of T.I., this ain't no album, this ain't no game, this a trap. Welcome to this Trap Tree High Design History episode where we're going to cover the city where the term trap originates from, as well as the inherent tie to trap music and the explosion of Atlanta's cultural influence on the rest of the country as a whole. Make sure to hit the like button, comment, share this, and follow me on all the socials. Links are down below in the description. This is LMC. Let's run it. Atlanta has been a hotspot for illicit trade in the southeast of the U.S. for several decades. It's a prime location due to its highways and interstates, connecting it with many other major cities throughout the U.S., in addition to an international airport, Hartsfield, which is one of the busiest airports in the entire world, making it ideal for international or intercontinental distribution. However, the years from 2000 to 2005 in particular reign as Atlanta's trafficking golden era, and that's mostly due to one man from one organization. Demetrius Big Meech Flannery and his brother Terry Southwest T. Flannery started trafficking at an early age back in their hometown of Detroit, Michigan. After moving to Atlanta, they were able to expand their operations across the country into leading trafficking hubs including LA, New York, and Miami. However, it would be Big Meech's branding and marketing strategies that would play a large role in the rise of BMF and its downfall. Big Meech took over the Atlanta hub while his brother Terry ventured out to LA. In Atlanta, Demetrius began hosting extravagant social events that were second to none. No expense was spared, with hundreds of thousands spent on food, drinks, and entertainment. These parties attracted celebrities ranging from chart-topping artists to professional athletes, including stars like Jay-Z, Diddy, Shaq, Floyd Money Mayweather. However, these interactions weren't always cordial. An investigation at the Buckhead nightclub involved the passing of Diddy's childhood friend and bodyguard, Anthony Wolf Jones. The suspect, Big Meech himself, though claims have never been substantiated, it was suspected that the shootout had to do with Diddy owing BMF money. But we can't know for sure. On the street level, BMF hosted hip-hop mixtapes promoting up-and-coming rappers such as Young Jeezy. Authorities allege that Big Meech's hip-hop label was one of the ways BMF would clean their money. The FBI also investigated his possible involvement with an ongoing beef between ATL rappers Jeezy and Gucci Mane, where Gucci shot and eliminated a home intruder. Gucci's lawyer alleged that the intruder came from the BMF family, but no connection was made. According to rapper Blue Da Vinci, Gucci wanted to join BMF, but Meech turned him down for being a loose cannon and also a known robber. Da Vinci was the only rapper actually signed to BMF's label. Now, there were rumors this was the way that Big Meech had planned to transition into a fully legitimate business. However, as the brand gained more and more public spotlight through their extravagant parties and BMF branded products, which included the packaging of their illicit products as well, his brother Terry was beginning to see signs of their eventual demise. Now, the brothers were having a falling out. Terry in LA decided to part ways and start his own organization in fear that the party's open marketing would lead to their downfall. He didn't like them being so flashy, and believe me, they were very, very flashy. He pleaded with his brother over a 5-month period, unknowingly being wiretapped by the DEA, providing them with over 900 pages of documentation. They were eventually sentenced to 30 years each. Demetrius, or Big Meech, is scheduled to be released in 2028, while Terry was granted an early compassionate release to home confinement in May of 2020 due to his health complications. In recent years, according to a report by All Hip Hop, Big Meech has considered flipping the meaning of BMF from Black Mafia Family to Big Meech Flannery. Either way, BMF will live on in the history books of Atlanta and the trap. And also, side note, funny enough, Big Meech's son, Little Meech, is actually being managed by one of the owners of Gumbo. If you haven't seen the Gumbo documentary that I did on Alexis Major and Luca Brasi, go check that out. But just a little side note I wanted to, note. Now, with the legalization of flower in many states, rappers have the ability to jump directly into the industry even though they are from potentially an illegal state like Georgia. See, 2022 was the premiere of Lil Baby's Wham brand. Although Georgia's laws only allow low-level, Delta 8 products, he focused on building a product for the future, making Wham a product meant for modern recreational markets. It actually launched in, I believe, a limited time drop in LA. But this is meaning that you can't legally buy right in Atlanta at the moment, but that's likely going to change in the near future. Now, the late takeoff from the Migos also got into the game with Gumbo, like I mentioned, Gumbo earlier, and again, reaching beyond the borders of the ATL to get directly involved in the industry. Like I said, go check out my Gumbo video if you haven't already. The link will be in the description. And we see this with plenty of other rappers, right? Now, we've also seen some lower tier rappers that maybe haven't been, as popular, but have made a name through entrepreneurship in this emerging new industry. Young Marley is another ATL rapper who has capitalized on designer branding techniques with his Shark Lotto, flavor. A cross between gelato and Skittles. He had a platinum artist like Moneybagg Yo and Jadakiss shout out Shark Lotto in their songs, making it a social and a status symbol. Especially when you have Yo dropping $1,000 for a zip on Shark Lotto in 2020 publicly. However, it hasn't been safe and sound for all of ATL's rappers, right? Gucci Mane's rapper Rollo was arrested at DeKalb Peachtree Airport after they discovered 440 pounds of flour, almost $1 million worth. The affidavit reported that Rollo was deeply tied to the Atlanta organization Farm America, which alleged him to have a leadership role within. He pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges, including conspiracy to possess with the intent to distribute at least a kilo of flour, possession of a firearm, and cleaning money. He was sentenced to 8 years, but was given 4 years credit for time served, with 1.5 off for good behavior. Now, his attorney is currently attempting to shave additional time off by getting him to complete his GED, which could release him this year in 2023. There also was a signed letter demanding his release by people like Drake and some other very, very big names. Now we'll have to wait, to see what happens with that. I hope we can see Rollo come home sooner than later. Now, still, the future of ATL's flower looks bright. With brands like Gas House and Real One in the mix, Gas House, a company run by two Georgia natives, Felix Murray and Kingston, have gone the similar route of some of ATL's rappers and partnering with other companies to launch their own brand. And on top of that, right, Kingston is himself a world-renowned grower and Felix a world-renowned businessman, and together they make a pretty good pair. I've also done a video on Gas House if you want to go check that out. The link will be down below in the description as well. Now, like I said though, this partnership between Felix and Kingston, right, this includes a crossover with Cookies, where they secured their Miami location along with multiple promotional opportunities in California's market. Real One, a brand run by CEO JR the director, linked up outside of Georgia state lines with Jokes Up in Studio City, California at their 5-star rated ice cream dispensary. And big shouts out to JR the director. I talked to him recently the other day. Very nice guy. I'm excited to work with him here in the future. But anyways, see, Jokes Up as also happens to be in collaboration with Young Marley for a future deal not yet disclosed to the public. Now, however, with Jokes Up latest facilities and grow operation, I have high hopes that something good is going to come from that. The willingness of brands like Gas House and Real One to immediately begin production with other companies outside of their own state should give them plenty of leverage going into the inevitable future of Georgia's legal market. Definitely look for them to be big players in the ATL in the upcoming years. They already kind of are, and they've kind of all worked together to help each other, which is super dope to see. And I actually cannot wait because I'm going to be actually traveling down to Atlanta in the next 2 to 3 months and linking up with a number of different people, including some of these brands, so very excited for that. Like I said, there's another video coming. It's going to be more of a documentary style rather than this kind of video essay style, but we'll talk more about that in the future. Though, because of the current restrictions on flower, the effect of legalization in other areas in the country, like my hometown of Seattle, which I dropped a video on last week, so go check that out if you haven't. The link will be down below in the description. But after legalization came a reverse green rush effect, leading smugglers to venture out west to bring discounted legal flower back into the ATL to sell at premium on the illicit market. And that could be done a number of different ways, whether it's sending it through the mail, and that's been really happening since pretty much the 90s or 80s. It's been happening for a while. Or the old-fashioned way, which has definitely been happening for far longer than, the 80s, probably 60s, 50s. You can't really know. Just driving it to Atlanta from Cali, right? But the thing about it, right? So Georgia Bureau of Investigations agent Ken Howard says, quote, "If you get safely out to Atlanta, you can mark that up to $3,000 or $5,000 a unit, a pound." He estimates that hundreds of thousands of units are coming in from legal markets such as California and Colorado, flooding the Atlanta market. And trust me, it absolutely is happening. Now, like I just mentioned earlier, whether they're sending it through the mail or they're driving it, there also is a third option, which is actually surprisingly common: utilizing private jets or chartering private planes to move boxes and boxes of units. Now, the GBI reported that there was 3 arrested trying to smuggle 100 units of flour through the Atlanta airport, and this would be a recurring trend that's been happening for a while now. We saw the same thing happen with Rollo, and on Super Bowl 53, right, there was definitely some inspiration for 4 Atlanta traffickers who had seen others, attempt to do this. And they were looking to capitalize on the influx of tourists for Super Bowl 53. They were already on law enforcement radar by the time they left Vegas with 200 units of flour. They made it to Hartsfield International Airport just days before Tom Brady's Patriots faced off against the Rams in 2019. Now, officials said it was one of the largest busts in the history of the airport. Another incident involving 174 units spread between 7 suitcases was from my hometown of Seattle. Sergeant Chase of Atlanta PD said that their canines alerted them to the belly of the plane as the luggage was being sent to baggage claim. He says there are several West Coast cities we've identified as being ones that will frequently see substances coming from, and Seattle is one of them, end quote. But it's not just the travelers, it's the airline employees that law enforcement has to look out for as well. Andre Mays, a TSA worker for Hartsfield, and Leslie Egger, a Delta airline employee, were caught in a sting operation that arranged for them to transport 2 kilos of illicit product in luggage they would carry past security and then on to New York. This was in exchange for $8,000. 2 more arrangements were made with fake product, eventually leading to charges from all 3 trades. And a similar case involving the same airline had the same system that caught 2 TSA agents and a Delta employee. Once again with 2 kilos, and once again utilizing fake product to add additional charges with future transactions, $4,000 up front with another $4,000 once the package was delivered in New York to the Delta employee. But what about the traditional organized crime? Well, not too long ago, after the Super Bowl bust that I mentioned earlier, the DEA has claimed that a major takedown of the Mexican Sinaloa cartel. This involved the arrest of 20 individuals, 15 of who were illegally there. They seized 30 pounds of flour in addition to over 100 kilos of M and H, plus 12,000 tablets, and have been attributed to the rise in, people passing away. Typically, these products were smuggled into Texas before making its final destination in Metro Atlanta. Part of the intervention came when DEA agents learned of a contract hit that was set out for a woman who owed the cartel thousands of dollars. By then, they had figured out the cartel's plans to harm and eliminate her down to the details of what rental property they were going to use. Luckily, they had enough information to move in before anything occurred. Now, in 2022-2023, the head of Atlanta's DEA, Robert Murphy, says in the 25 years he's been fighting illicit products, this is the worst he's ever seen it. Quote, "They want to hide in plain sight," end quote. They aren't driving around in exotic cars and dropping cash on luxuries. They live in the suburban subdivisions of Atlanta, places like Forest Park, where 600 keys of M and full conversion labs have been found, with neighbors saying things like, quote, "We didn't know, we just didn't know this was going on," end quote. Murphy says that there are up to 5 different cartels now operating in Atlanta, with him saying, quote, "Everybody thinks it's not in my neighborhood. The same thing that makes Atlanta attractive to Fortune 500 companies is the same thing that the Mexican cartel is looking for." Now, perhaps less of a surprise would be the discovery of trafficking beyond the streets of Atlanta and into the prison systems. Jessica Burnett, aka the Madam, was known for being a former prison guard who was caught with intent to distribute M and flour throughout the state prison system. She was a sergeant and a senior guard with Core Civis, a private prison company operating with Coffee County Correctional Facility. The Madam was one of 48 defendants in Operation Sandy Bottom, a sting that was carried out in an area known as, quote, the Bottoms, where the Gangster Disciple Street, group mainly operated. She was one of 2 prison guards indicted, both from Coffee County Correctional Facility. Now, lawmakers in 2019 finally decided it was time to take steps towards legalization by passing legislation allowing commercial businesses to start to finally cultivate indoors under close supervision. However, this was for only low-level amount in the plant, really just Delta 8, right? And the program only issued 6 licenses, so it's very, very limited. Now, this will do little to slow down any cartel or even any individual and the illicit smugglers looking to capitalize on a state where in most parts it's impossible to get legal quality flour. However, with the introduction of AI technology and predictive modeling, law enforcement is upgrading how they are fighting back against the illicit trade in hopes to identify patterns and trends by these illicit organizations. But because of that, Atlanta as a case study provides much insight into trafficking as we continue to monitor its transition into the illegal market and perhaps a recreational one. As an international hub for trafficking, it's honestly not gonna ever stop because of flower legalization, because it's not just what's coming in, but also what's going out. Sure, for now, high quality flower is in high demand with hardly any legal supply. But once that changes, we will see a drop in importing. But the exporting of this illicit substance through Atlanta's international airports, connected interstates, will likely remain an issue for some time to come. And that's where geography plays such a critical role. We'll see how things progress.
I love you, Bobby.
Anyways, I want to say big shouts out to everyone that's watching from Atlanta. I can't wait to be visiting, your guys' beautiful city coming up here pretty soon. Definitely do not hesitate to tap in with your boy. Send me an email, a DM, there's Twitter, all that stuff. Connect with me. Would love to hear your story potentially and just, see if there's any dope stories I could cover there. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this Trap Tree High Design History episode. Definitely make sure to go follow me on all the social medias, hit the like button, subscribe, comment down below. And if you like this video, then you're going to want to watch my other video, which is called The Smugglers of New York, History of Trapping in NYC next. You can find it at the end screen coming up here. Anyways, make sure to tap in with your boy. Really appreciate y'all. Follow me on all the socials, like I said. Subscribe, like, all that good stuff. This is LMC signing out. The trap has changed, the routes have shifted, but almost always the goal has stayed the same. That's to get to the chicken, count up the green, collect the dead presidents, get to the thickets, get into the cheddar, the fetty. I could go on and on. But making money has always been the incentive for the trap. Moving products to one place from another and making money on marginal difference in cost and wholesale. And what city and region is absolutely overlooked when it comes to trapping? Well, that is my hometown of Seattle, Washington, and the greater Pacific Northwest region in the United States of America. Now, this is a TTS or Trap Tree series episode, but it's actually a collaboration between my other series and that of High Design History. So in this TTS High Design History episode, we are going to cover the history and progression of Seattle's trappers and pushers in regards to this plant and how it has affected the current day. Because in a lot of ways, if we look below the surface, the trap is playing a major role in legal markets today and that of brand building and overall financial stability, while also educating and developing folks now operating in the legal market like myself. I personally got to see the end of the traditional market in Seattle and the rest of the state, given I was working throughout Seattle's unregulated medical market and traditional market throughout all of high school in the Central District, attending Garfield High School. Now, today in Seattle, the traditional market for flower has pretty much been extinguished and trappers have moved to other plays and other substances. But in this video, we are going to explore Seattle's tree trapping history and the different progressions of the trap in Seatown and around the state of Washington. Buckle up, this one's gonna get personal for myself and maybe some of y'all watching that are from the town. Please make sure to hit the like button, share this video, subscribe, and follow me on the social medias. The links are down below. Welcome to this Trap Tree High Design History episode. This is LMC. Let's run it. Typically, when people think of the history of smuggling here in the US, we tend to focus on our southern borders like California or Florida. But today, well, we're going to dive into the Pacific Northwest, specifically Seattle, and its rich history of trapping and how it evolved from its involvement in the counterculture movement during the 60s and 70s to the post-rock grunge era into the current state we're in today. So, beginning in the mid-19th century, the first illicit products brought into the Pacific Northwest were introduced by immigrant Chinese workers. Cities like Portland and Seattle had large Chinese populations who migrated along with the expansion of the railroad system. And with these large Chinese populations came the Chinese owned and operated smoking dens. These dens didn't just attract Chinese workers, but American citizens as well. Dens were popping up all along the West Coast, including major cities like San Diego and Seattle, which prompted America's first ever, quote, war on illicit products. Though, as history has gone on to show, the type of policies created from these wars often translate to policies against minorities more so than policies against the formerly legal product themselves. For example, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 didn't just ban illicit imports, but it also banned any Chinese living in the US from becoming a naturalized citizen, along with banning Chinese immigration altogether. While this law was written to last only a decade, it was renewed and made permanent 20 years later in 1902. Now, for the most part, there was no overlord or crime underworld that law enforcement was dealing with here, but were these dens still a trap? Absolutely. However, these were literally laborers and business owners who suddenly had their businesses banned and products deemed illegal. It wasn't until 1943 that the act was repealed, just in time to get aid from the Chinese citizens and China itself to help fight against the Japanese in World War II. Now, the second war on illicit products in the Pacific Northwest would follow in the next century. The ban on the Chinese was lifted, but the war soon shifted its focus from the Chinese and their smoking dens to flower and new age hallucinogens. But one of the most important contributors to this rise of flower in the Pacific Northwest was actually the war in Vietnam. See, the counterculture movement, which we will go deeper into later, was on the rise as protests against the Vietnam War became more and more popularized with the youth. Eventually, this led to thousands leaving cities like Seattle and other northwestern areas of the US to move away into Canada, particularly British Columbia and the San Juan Islands. The San Juan Islands became the home of large quantities of production of world popular flavors like Northern Lights, which is a flavor built for harsher climate of the islands in the Pacific Northwest. See, by the 1970s, these islands became a hotspot for cultivation and smuggling alike. The Pacific Northwest plethora of waterways, inlets, and islands make it a haven for traffickers. Now, over time, the proximity of British Columbia, or BC, to Washington began to play a major role in the smuggling landscape of Seattle and the Pacific Northwest. The cultivation techniques from the early counterculture movement have been passed on and spread like wildfire, bringing in more opportunity for criminal organizations to tap in and handle the distribution. But while sharing knowledge and information helps push a community forward, this watered-down effect of passing along growing techniques to anyone and everyone led to the cultivation of much lower quality bud, and typically grown with little care and left to the elements. Now, the quality of this flower eventually came to be known as Beasters. So some think of Beasters as Canada's mids, but in reality it's likely that anything called Beasters was simply outdoor herb from anywhere along the Canadian border and the Pacific Northwest. it was good marketing for your dealer to say this flower came all the way from Canada just because, well, it sounded special. But in reality, it was just readily available in large quantities, which made it more affordable to flip, especially if you added an extra surcharge for international goods, right? The good stuff. Now, that doesn't explain the high reputation the Pacific Northwest has for their high quality cultivation. Eventually, traditional market flowers started improving their quality from this area due to legalization and the development of prominent cultivars and bean banks. In 2001 marked the beginning of medically legalized flower in Washington. This convinced many growers and dealers to convert from traditional market to the legal industry. Kind of. But now, indoor operations were becoming more common, with players like DJ Short developing flavors and focused more on the sweet and flavorful side rather than the typical spice you would get from outdoor Afghan phenotypes like Northern Lights. Flavors like DJ Short's Blueberry proved there were more to the plant than the high and the popularity of new hybrid blends, grown with more favorable conditions indoors, producing new flavors and aromas not previously experienced by enthusiasts. In fact, this was the beginning of the new age connoisseur in the market. Flower like this could be charged at a premium in the traditional market at $60 or more for your typical 3.5 G's instead of your $20 to $40 for Beasters. Now, we head into the golden era. Still, this new era of legalization that has assisted the traditional market in producing high quality product in larger quantities is probably considered by most organized crime as the post-golden age of smuggling in the Pacific Northwest. Long before the spread of Beasters, there was something else spreading across the country, particularly in states within the Pacific Northwest. This was during a time of cultural experimentation, and America's youth were ready to change mainstream values and were open to an alternative lifestyle in an effort to avoid conformity. The counterculture scene was met with societal challenges and negative stereotypes of illicit use. This also captured the attention of organized crime looking to capitalize by providing flower and other illicit products to its members and the broader community. Gangs of this era had a multifaceted approach in infiltrating the Pacific Northwest and communities alike, typically presenting themselves as something other than violent or ruthless, but instead as a group of rebels fighting against the established world order to support the counterculture. See, the counterculture provided both customers and future members that helped spread these networks. However, the infiltration tactic would not only be used by these gangs, but also by our own government. So the FBI's counterintelligence program, aka COINTELPRO, was formed to infiltrate groups to monitor activities and in some cases have promoted or engaged in illegal activities. Due to the nature of this program, it was dismantled in 1971. Now you could also argue that that's back again, but that's for another video. But however, these organizations like the Black Panthers had been wrecked by efforts to crush the counterculture and minority movements, many of which had turned to illicit trafficking to further fund the movements themselves. And unfortunately, after these organizations slowly dissipated, society was left with an open market, making room for criminal organizations to fill the void. With this cycle, we see the devastation of minority groups and communities, the proliferation of organized crime, followed by the gentrification of these areas, with minorities being pushed out. Now, sometimes we don't notice the less fortunate in society. Sometimes their stories aren't really heard until it directly affects someone we know, like a friend, a family member, or in this case, a celebrity. The counterculture movement had progressed into the 1990s, once again revolutionizing pop culture with music. This behind the lead singer of Nirvana, Kurt Cobain. Between 1986 and 1992, overdose or related people passing away rose by 84%, with the record levels having been surpassed only 6 months into the following year at the time of that study from the Harborview Medical Center. Although his passing was not attributed to an overdose, it was noted in his autopsy that he had fresh needle marks in his arm with high concentrated dose in the system. His passing opened the eyes to the rest of the nation to what was going on in Seattle's illicit market, and had reached beyond the streets and into the homes of listeners through MTV. When the music scene took off in Seattle, Bob Timmons, a former addict turned counselor for Rockstars, recalls being recruited to work with 6 musicians from 3 different bands, all of which were using the same substance found in Kurt Cobain when he passed at the age of 27. Mary Truscott, the advertising manager of American Music, which was an equipment and repair shop for major bands in Seattle during the 90s, said that Seattle's most popular illicit substance at that time existed at all levels of the music business. It exists in the clubs, it exists on all levels, from the most desperate, hard scrabble, trying to be rock star band, on up to the successful bands even. She goes on to say that white stuff had fallen out of favor as Cobain and the rest of the Seattle's grunge scene substance of choice was the exact opposite of that, the brown, falling more in line with the vibes of the counterculture of that period compared to the charged up decade of the 80s. All that being said though, former label owner Daniel House of CZ Records would emphasize that the reality is that flower and alcohol are most prevalent in the music industry. Jeff Gilbert, a writer for Guitar World magazine at the time, agreed, pointing out, quote, "There's an impression that everyone here is strung out on the hard stuff. That's not true. If anything, they're all a bunch of flowerheads." And if you're a flowerhead, you need to check out our friends over at getseedsrighthere.com. If you're looking for amazing prices for high quality beans and cuts of flavors, go over to getseedsrighthere.com and get high quality beans and cuts for a great price. Let's jump back into it. Now, in modern times, the smugglers have become smarter, their technology has become better, and their products have become more potentially dangerous. Instead of vertical hierarchies that can be infiltrated and lead to the complete collapse of an entire criminal organization, they have leaned more towards a horizontal structure by distributing their network across channels, including working with other criminal organizations rather than against one another. Instead of hidden compartments on boats and vehicles, they have evolved into semi-submerged and fully submerged vessels equipped with anti-detection and navigation software. Typically, these are third-party contractors used by cartels like the Jalisco New Generation Cartel or the CGNG. According to an article on justice.gov in 2020, an 18-month investigation ended in the arrest of an alleged member of the CJNG cartel in Seattle. They discovered over 50 pounds of illicit product in addition to over 3,000 synthetic pills, 22 firearms, and $500,000 in cash. The new powerful synthetic pills that have hit the market have been involved in 70% of the overdose people passing away in Seattle, King County area. It comes full circle as these illicit synthetic products are actually derived from the original natural products that came in from back in the 19th century, but many times more addictive and potentially deadly. Now let's come full circle. Still, that hasn't meant that they haven't given up on natural products by any means. See, the rise of the 2012 recreational market in Seattle and across the Pacific Northwest has in a sense given some a false badge of courage, with prosecutors describing a string of Chinese defendants they've come across as folks that, quote, maybe thought they wouldn't get in that much trouble if they got caught doing it. It appears that the word has spread that it's a good business to get into, so people go into it, which was a quote from Grays Harbor County Chief Criminal Deputy Prosecutor Jason Walker. In May of 2018, coordinated raids between King and Pierce counties focused on homes with unusually high electric bills. For example, a 2-month bill of $2,500 and a 3-month bill for $37,000. They ended up seizing over 3,000 plants, all from a single Chinese family, with the defendants being a married couple and the husband's brother. Now, typically, these are families trying to take advantage of the legal market by selling into non-legal states in their traditional markets for twice or even 4 times the price in Washington at the time. The defendants they've come across range anywhere between 20-somethings to late 60s, both male and female, further painting the picture of individual family-oriented businesses rather than coordinated organized crime syndicates. Some have lived in the country long enough to have become naturalized citizens, while others even have their green cards. We're talking single men, married couples, and even families with children. Now, that's not to say that there is not organized crime involved with this. We'll talk about that a little bit later on this video. But Pierce County Deputy Prosecutor John Sheeran points out that, quote, this is not a violent group looking to defend their property in any kind of violent way. This is a money-making venture. This is a conspiracy to make money illegally, end quote. According to Sheeran, a lot of the defendants moved here from somewhere back east based on the license plates, driver's licenses, and even plane tickets that had been recovered. Now, this is very true. See, growing up in Seattle, I was personally heavily entrenched in Seattle's medical markets and was lucky enough to operate in them during the second half of my high school years. I attended Garfield High School, located in the Central District of Seattle, where I was able to take part in the medical market as well as the traditional market, given that the medical markets on the West Coast were extremely unregulated and free for really anyone to take part that had a medical card written for them by a doctor. The medical markets became even more relaxed when in 2012, Washington and Colorado decided to legalize the plant recreationally, which started what I call a limbo period, where there was no police enforcement due to the fact that the recreational market had not officially opened yet. Typically, it takes anywhere from like 2 to 5 years, right, on average. Now, being that Washington was the first state alongside Colorado to have this limbo period of really lax laws, Well, folks from all over the country would fly into Seattle to purchase high-quality flower for extremely good prices in comparison to their home regions across the country. So this leads me and a good friend of mine to start working for gray market medical delivery companies advertising on Craigslist during high school. And by the end of the last year of high school for me, we were running our own delivery service, also being advertised on Craigslist, where we served all types of people from all walks of life, high quality flower. But even before rec was available, we had people in Seattle like Eric, an illicit Craigslist flower peddler from the early 2000s. Around that time, Jeff Eag of Seattle's DEA office said the amount of illicit transactions that occur online isn't enough to go after those marketing on the early social media sites of MySpace, LiveJournal, and Friendster, but instead focus on online pharmacies that sell illegal prescriptions to people without prescriptions for those products at high profit margins. In 2004, Seattle voters approved an initiative requiring police to make enforcement of possession their lowest priority by making less than 40 grams a misdemeanor. So by 2005, Eric, who was confidently pushing his product online, felt he had no real concern when he told his story to the Seattle Times. He would go on to talk about his customers felt more at ease connecting online instead of on the streets, kind of foreshadowing what would happen with Ross Albright and the Silk Road, but that's for another video. And besides that, none of these dealers were afraid of any sort of legal consequence from either the government or the sites that they were using for business at the time. Perhaps it was because of this, Eric went as far as to post that he was willing to trade for favors from women or the traditional money from men, or even men who offered their women. He would give a discount. Now, that's not exactly the process I had in mind with what I was doing. See, and this was also a lot later on. This is almost 10 years from then. And I remember as a high schooler driving every other day during lunchtime down to SeaTac Airport, where I would link up with folks from all over the country. As long as they had a medical card, well, I would serve them. And as a Washington State medical card holder, we were legally allowed to have up to 24 ounces of flower at any given time. Yet that didn't really stop any of us from bringing more weight. Now, if people who flew into SeaTac Airport were to buy a 5-pack or a 10-pack or a 20, well, I had no idea what they were going to do with it. And really, it was none of my business. Now, if we had to speculate, I'm sure most of these folks either wrapped them up in the mail or drove them back to their home state so they could triple or even quadruple their profits. Now, those were folks flying in from all over the country, but when it came to the neighboring states, well, typically the methodology for smugglers looking to bring work back from Washington was the caravan style. A number of big smuggling groups in Idaho, Montana, and other states would drive in 5, 8, maybe 10 cars, creating a caravan, where they would come into Seattle, link up with a grower or a trapper like myself, and we would help source anywhere from 20 to 500 units. I remember having to drive all over the state for 1 or 2 days straight, trying to source enough product for their orders. I drive down to Olympia, pick up 15 units here. I drive up to Bellingham to get 20 units here. I drive to Monroe to get another 10 here, and to Tacoma to get another 20 there. Now, all of these people in these caravans would be medical patients, so technically it was all above board. But now, if I had to guess, when these caravans had packed up their cars, they would travel back to places like Idaho and Montana and would have a driving system where 3 cars in the middle of the caravan would have all of the product in it. And then there would be 2 in the back that was there to make sure that they were dummy cars, meaning that if a cop was to be driving behind the caravan, one of the 2 cars in the back would start driving recklessly to get the cop to pull them over, so to let the caravan and the car's content, the actual product, continue on its journey back home, evading law enforcement. The caravan would also have a scout car that would drive far ahead to alert the rest of the caravan if there were any cops ahead and for them to be cautious. Now, like I said, I'm not sure if that was the case because really once me and growers I worked with sourced product for them in state, we really had no idea where it was going. That was just a guess, right? But really, I was very lucky to experience the last of an amazing era, where Seattle was one of the main destinations for folks around the country, right behind Denver and the state of California, given that medical market was so unregulated, as well as the announcement that Seattle and the state of Washington was the first state to legalize for recreational use. Now, if you haven't seen the video I did on the Chinese Mafia and the Bubba flavors, I highly recommend you check that out to help give you more context in this current video you're watching now. But really, starting in the early 2000s, the production of illicit products like flour and harder substances started to move away from large-scale production, usually located in rural areas, to being more placed within the urban regions, closer to buyers and larger, more dense populations. In Seattle, we saw the boom of Chinese and Vietnamese trap grows explode. Back during my high school years, neighborhoods in Seattle like Beacon Hill and Skyway were known to have many of these trap grows, where there would be a cluster of houses scattered throughout each neighborhood, where 5 to 20 light grows would be operating. These trap grows were more decentralized, like I mentioned earlier, with it being more horizontal, making it nearly impossible for law enforcement to fully stamp them out. These trap grows, for example, in Beacon Hill would insulate the house to prevent too much of an odor, and the growers operating them would steal power from neighboring houses to disperse and therefore camouflage the grow from being found out. Given that law enforcement typically would scan the city's power grid to see if there was any houses using an abnormal amount of electricity, like I mentioned earlier, which then would put them on law enforcement's radar to be further investigated if they had a abnormal, electrical charge. Now, in the first half of my high school career, I typically dealt with mainly Vietnamese. Now, the Vietnamese were some of my favorite people to work with, given their high quality and typically competitive pricing. But by the end of my high school career and after that, I started to deal with more and more Chinese nationals. I had no problem with it because, well, their prices were even more competitive. Although maybe the quality was a bit lower in comparison with the Vietnamese growers I originally would work with. But as time went on, I started to see more and more Chinese trap grows, and well, this is just a microcosm of a larger trend happening in not just Seattle, but all over the PNW and the West Coast. With the migrations from the Chinese in these illegal markets into early recreational markets of the Pacific Northwest came the devastation of the communities these growers and dealers cultivated and ran their business in. Their ability and willingness to make full cash payments on their properties would drastically distort the real estate markets they resided in, raising the cost of the homes around them, pushing out any new homebuyer prospects from those areas and replacing them with a family or individuals with vastly higher income or businesses looking to convert property into their own commercial real estate. However, Operation Green Jade was a 2017 bust that had federal agents trace money transfers from China that provided the cash used to get out and convert over 20 homes into grow houses. In cases like this, the DA, Assistant Special Agent in charge in Seattle, Russ Beyer, says, quote, "We've seen no indication of any government affiliation. It's traditional organized crime, Chinese syndicates that are profiting," end quote. This also reveals that many of the Chinese involved were victims, having been trafficked, resulting in their release without being charged. And like I said, go check out that video that I did a few months ago, or like 6 months ago, regarding this specific topic about the Chinese mafia. However, beyond these neighborhoods and communities lies a forgotten wasteland that has existed since the 1930s. And this is truly a really crazy place and story. See, this is a place that consistently bred its own breed of dealers. The East Duwamish Greenbelt, aka the Jungle, is a place marked by its homelessness and criminal activity. In 2016, with 2 people passing away and the 3rd wounded, sparked an outcry that would put a spotlight on these so-called hobo jungles, end quote, that began spreading out from Seattle's Hoovervilles, the rundown towns put together by the homeless during the Great Depression. Now fast forward back to the year 2000, we have what is now become known as the Jungle. And the Jungle is this massive place. You can see it by the highway. Like, cops don't even go into this place. It's that crazy. In the year 2000, right, only a 14-year-old named Sun Tran would move there, coming from a broken home, working in a sweatshop in the basement of his drunken father. Since the age of 8, he worked as soon as he would get home from school till 9 or 10 at night. The same year he would enter the jungle would be the same year he began his journey to become considered the king of the jungle. After having been convicted of assault and kidnapping, he has served time in state prison, still having yet to ever work an actual job. He wrote in letters to the court that this had become his escape, and with his release in 2012, he had gotten his girlfriend pregnant and saw this as his means to support his family, saying, quote, "I told myself that this time it was different because I wasn't doing it to support my habit. This time I was doing it to support who I cared for," end quote. He goes on to paint a picture that speaks to the word trap, saying, quote, "I know this sounds crazy, but that is what I thought at the time. I now know that what I was doing was actually very destructive to my family, and I would do anything to go back in time and make better decisions. I don't know how everything occurred so fast," end quote. Tran was finally arrested again April 2015 after years of investigating, informants, and wiretaps. Investigators found Tran's organization moved more than 60 pounds of illicit product each month. That's almost a bag of concrete. And we're talking about the hard stuff, right? But in the words of Brent Harp, his defense attorney, quote, Mr. Tran didn't create the jungle created Mr. Tran, end quote. Now, the current market for illegal flower in Seattle and around the state is now dead. These trap grows are still operating, but really they are strictly being operated to serve other markets where flower is still illicit. In fact, the sales for legal flowers actually dropped in 2022 for the first time since recreational became available in 2012. It was an 8% drop, totaling over $40 million. However, Brian Smith of the Washington State Liquor and Flower Board attributes this to sales simply returning to normal growth in comparison to the spike seen during the pandemic. A flower data firm, Headset, found this to be aligned with the fact that all sales across the legal states have been in decline that began in July of 2021. Another Washington study found that the average person spent at the dispos were around $34.14 in July of 2021 to $31.41 in July of 2022. In addition to finding that across all markets, some visits decline even more so than purchase amounts. Still, signs point to this being a correction rather than a reversal, as 2022 still brought in more revenue than all previous years other than 2021, which was obviously the pandemic. Now, to jump to the future, right? Meanwhile, lawmakers have stepped in to try to combat the war on these illicit products in an entirely new way. Governor Jay Inslee signed SB 5476 into law in February 2021, similar to Seattle's 2004 initiative, giving individuals the ability to possess controlled substances and having it treated as a misdemeanor instead of a felony. We're seeing that lawmakers are looking for alternative solutions without targeting or heavily penalizing the individual. However, in 2010, City Attorney Pete Holmes had fought to uphold Seattle's Department of Public Defense's policy of releasing repeat offenders into social services or let go altogether without sentencing. During this time, Seattle has seen increased crime rates with a 20% increase in violent crime between 2020 and 2021. Shootings and shots fired increased by 40%. Still, it will be interesting to see how things play out in Seattle and the rest of the Pacific Northwest. Will these loose laws eventually find a way to help these individuals while bringing down the overall crime rate? Or will things continue in their current trajectory? Right? I think we're hitting all-time highs in Seattle for crime in the last 20 years. Anyways, before we wrap up the video, I just want to remind y'all to go check out our friends over at getseedsrighthere.com. If you're looking for amazing prices for high quality beans and cuts of flavors, go over to getseedsrighthere.com. Get high quality beans and cuts for a great price at getseedsrighthere.com. Now let's jump back into it. So in conclusion, I think Seattle and the PNW, the Pacific Northwest, is absolutely one of the most overlooked regions when it comes to the trap, jugging, and D-boys. But trust me, there is a rich culture of it here. I'm not glorifying it, but when we talk about the four corners of the United States and that of New York, Florida, Cali/Texas, and then Washington, well, there's inherently a concentration of smugglers giving a number of variables. One of the biggest just being geographically, and while Seattle is the main city in the Pacific Northwest region of the country, and therefore a major hub for smugglers. As Seattle's population increases, well, we'll see the trap expand as well as with harder substances, unfortunately. Anyways, this is just a breakdown of the history of trapping in Seattle and the greater Pacific Northwest region. I want to give you a little insight into my hometown, my home state, and what's going on up here in the Pacific Northwest. Let us know down in the comments which city or region do you want us to cover next, and also make sure to join the Discord, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and all the other social medias. Also, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and share this video. Shout out to all the trappers, hustlers, and juggers. Make sure you're looking to use the trap as a stepping stone to legitimate entrepreneurship. Don't get trapped in the trap. Also, shout out to the North, South End, CD, and West, and everywhere else in Seattle and beyond. Anyways, I really appreciate y'all for listening and making it to the end of this video. This is LMC, signing out.
Welcome to Miami Vice City, the land where some of the most infamous trappers and smugglers operated, spreading generations of flower throughout Florida and the rest of the US. In this Traptree City documentary, we're going to travel through the peak decades of product production and distribution of the illicit market up to the modern era of decriminalization. It's a culmination of Miami's rich history from the underground. Make sure to like button, make sure to subscribe, follow us on the social medias, links are down below in the description. Anyways, this is LMC. Let's run it. Most stories of the golden era of flower smuggling really start with the counterculture movement within the US. However, with Miami, many outside influences directly impacted the city into becoming one of the powerhouse hubs of illicit flower distribution throughout America. Starting with the Colombians during the 1960s, Colombian flower became extremely popular among Americans due to the quality. The Colombians were producing crops far superior to domestically grown flower in the US. Their plants had higher potency, stronger aromas, and visually the most superior in comparison to American growers at the time. With the counterculture movement creating skyrocketing demands for the plant, the expensive development of Colombian smuggling routes and distribution networks provided a key resource for consumers. Miami in particular became a primary entry point for their flower shipments to take advantage of its proximity to South America and its extensive coastline. For large shipments, hidden compartments in the commercial cargo shipments were used, while mules or individuals transporting smaller quantities on a smaller vessel or private planes. These traffic routes would eventually lay the foundation for the extent of underground operations into the 70s, 80s, and beyond, and still used to this day really. Now before we get on with the video, I want to say big thank you to our sponsor, GoPack. Now GoPack is a really dope, kind of fashion forward, smell proof, on the go rolling kit / bag that allows you to roll up whenever you need to. And it's got all different types of utilities. It's got, a built-in rolling tray. It's got, a poker. It's got, snipping, trimmers. It's got all different types of things that I haven't even mentioned. And it's great for being on the go. If you travel a lot, I highly recommend the GoPack. I've been using it a lot. There's multiple different sizes, right? And if you want to support the channel, you need to go to gopackstation.com. That's gopackstation.com and use my discount code LMC10. It's gonna give you 10% off your entire order. And like I said, I highly recommend these bags. These are amazing to travel with, especially, if you're going into places where maybe smell is an issue. But go to gopackstation.com, use my discount code LMC10 and get 10% off your entire order. Shout out to GoPack for sponsoring this video. Now let's jump back into the video. The Colombians weren't the only players in Miami. Flower from Cuba was making its way into Miami on the backs of refugee immigrants fleeing Fidel Castro's communist regime. The Cuban community began to grow in Miami alongside the illicit market as Cuban dealers were able to capitalize on their connections with the immigrant community and networks throughout Miami. Many of the Cuban smugglers were familiar enough with the local maritime routes to expand operations from the Caribbean and South America directly into Miami. Now, by the end of the 60s, the counterculture movement had reached new heights with dedicated events and festivals celebrating hippie culture and the flower that came along with it. In 1968, the Miami Pop Festival kicked off a year before the launch of Woodstock. The festival consisted of 2 separate concert events with 2 days in May and 3 days in December, with both events bringing together around 120,000 people. This included acts like Jimi Hendrix, Joni Mitchell, Marvin Gaye, and Fleetwood Mac. The success of the festival led the future events like the first ever Woodstock, which put a positive spotlight on hippie culture in the mainstream. However, months later after Woodstock's success, the Palm Beach International Music and Arts Festival, just 70 miles north of Miami, held one of the most disastrous events up to that time. The temp dropped into the 40s as people tore down outhouses to use as firewood to warm themselves up. With around 40,000 in attendance, there were 130 overdoses with 130 arrests made. And you think about the Fire Fest, that seems like a really bad Fire Fest. So by this time, Jamaican flower is becoming more and more prominent in the streets, with Cubans pushing the product. And with the increased black market activity came increased corruption in law enforcement. December 5th, 1969, Inspector Francis Napier, a 31-year-old veteran of the Miami PD, was arrested while on duty with his involvement in a $100,000 a week flower racket. That same night, one of his partners was detained for having 400 pounds of flour in his car, with another partner being nabbed the next morning at a warehouse where they stashed 1,000 pounds of Jamaican-grown flour. And this turned out to be the biggest bust in Miami history at the time. Now, entering into the 1970s, the Medellin cartel, led by Pablo Escobar, was most famous for his coke trade. But he was also a major player in the flour trade as well. And this is when Santa Marta gold, or Colombian gold, was becoming more known in the community as the world's most sought after flour. With peak demand and a near monopoly on top quality supply, Colombian smugglers were receiving more funds and resources than ever to move flour into Miami's port and other major hubs in the US. And this introduced the use of vessels beyond aircrafts or boats as they moved into semi-submerged and fully submerged vessels, submarines. These were basically submarines meant for direct transport of flour from Colombia into the seaports of the US. Some are equipped with the state-of-the-art GPS and tracking systems, along with stealth tech with low noise propellers and low profiles that make them near impossible to see or detect at night. To this day, it's hard to judge how many of these vessels are consistently operating, as they are some of the most difficult to detect. But as the decades have gone on, more and more have been caught in the waters off the coasts of both South and North America, showing that this is something that has continued to develop as time goes on. Now, before we go on, please make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and definitely check out all the other videos if you haven't watched them. Follow me on all the other social medias to stay up to date on new LMC content. And yeah, links are down below in the description. I really appreciate you guys for rocking with me. All right, now let's get back into the history of Miami's trappers and smugglers. So Star Island. The smuggling into the Miami market was the beginning to ramp up from pounds to tons. Jamaican flour was becoming more and more popular as equally potent alternatives to Colombian grown crops. Perhaps none made more of a direct impact on Jamaica's flour market than Thomas Riley, aka Brother Love. Along with his preacher friend Edward Sega and the members of their Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church of Miami Beach. Well, definitely check out that full breakdown of Brother Love and the Coptic Church. There's an actual whole video I did on them. It's linked down below in the description. But basically, Thomas Riley brought a group of Americans to Jamaica, claiming that they were in search of God and flour. They eventually amassed a movement with the people of Jamaica who looked at Riley as a figurehead that was bringing a positive change to the community. They eventually grew the Jamaican flour market into an international player where they moved their thousands of acres of flour product into the US market through Miami. They set up a church on Star Island, which is one of the most prominent islands in Miami, just off the coast of Miami. So 43 Star Island became the Miami Beach home to wealthy flour smugglers who openly consumed and touted their immunity from US laws due to their religious protection. This even led to their own shipping company that moved freighters of flour that were constitutionally protected by their religion at the time, which might make this the most high-profile gray market mover in history with international clout. However, in 1979, Dan Rather's CBS Evening News report would air a video showing youth members of the Coptic Church partaking and playing in smoke-filled rooms. The result had top-ranking members of the church indicted for smuggling of over 100 tons of flour. Thomas Riley faced 15 years but served 12 after being released in 1994, but is definitely, I would call him the Pablo Escobar of flour. By far the biggest, operation ever. Now, at the same time, the Colombians were still ramping up production and distribution. Robert Planchorn and Robert Meinster were leaders of the media dubbed Black Tuna Gang. They were named after their code word black tuna, which was actually packaged flour. They were indicted for what was described as the biggest and slickest smuggling operations in history. They moved over 500 tons of Santa Marta gold throughout the 70s, and many times they operated directly out of the presidential suite of the Fontainebleau Miami Beach. They were eventually caught directly due to the first ever venture between the FBI and CIA. Now, Planchorn was sentenced to 64 years and was actually released in 2008 after serving 28 years. Now, the Black Tuna Gang employed highly skilled and knowledgeable fishermen like Raymond Stansel. Now, Stansel had a fair sense for control over boats under extreme ocean conditions. Plus, his in-depth knowledge of the various seaways, inlets, and ports of Florida's coast made him more than formidable against law enforcement. However, Stancil worked independently, moving shipments into Florida from both Colombia and Jamaica. He was able to bring in massive amounts of Colombian gold from the shores of Santa Marta, Colombia, back to the southern Florida region within 10 days of sea travel. From Jamaica, he brought in shipments of 50-pound burlap sacks, which only took 5 days of sea travel. Word began spreading among the other fishermen with stories of $175 pounds being sold with $165 worth of profit. Stancil was a pioneer of the trafficking labyrinth that the multitude of inlets provided the future generation of smugglers in the 80s in Florida. It took law enforcement years to finally realize the true amount of flour that was being moved into Miami and its network in southern Florida. But after only 2 operations in 1974, more than 200,000 pounds of flour was seized, marking the territory as one of the nation's highest trafficked smuggling routes. Now, Stancil's story doesn't have a typical ending. In 1974, after being on law enforcement radar, he made a trip out to Honduras to go scuba diving on New Year's Eve. Things appeared to go wrong during the trip where he was pronounced dead without a body being recovered. However, a traffic accident in Australia in 2015 revealed that he not only faked his death, but had lived a completely alternate life after moving to Australia and starting a family with a wife and now 2 kids. He was fatally killed in this accident, unfortunately, revealing his long-lost identity as one of the most prolific flour smugglers during the golden era of smuggling. Now, again, when it comes to easy and convenient transport during your travels, the sponsor of this video, GoPack, has you covered. Now, GoPack, like I said, is a fashion-centric, smell-proof bag that allows people that like to partake to be able to travel on the go. Now, GoPack is a bunch of different designs while having a multitude of different compartments, like I mentioned earlier. And if you want to support this channel, and you also want to get one of these amazing packs, you can go to gopackstation.com and use my discount code LMC10 to get 10% off your entire order. Now again, use my code LMC10 to get 10% off your entire order at gopackstation.com. Big shouts out to the homies over at GoPack. Now, let's jump back into the content. The 1980s. Like I said, Robert Stancil was a pioneer for the future black market trade into Miami. Cartels and criminal organizations were now actively looking for their next Robert Stancils that could evade law enforcement and quickly move heavy shipments internationally. Well, the US government inadvertently gave the cartels exactly what they were looking for when the feds banned commercial fishing in the Everglades National Park in the 80s. This almost completely dried up the Everglades city economy, also known as the 10,000 Islands, just 85 miles west of Miami. And for the most part, the town relied on the fishing and crabbing industry for most of its income. Now, without jobs, many of the fishermen had no use for their boats or skills on the water. Besides, now they were seen as criminals if they were to do so, something that they were already formally paid to do, which is pretty crazy. Now, with Robert Stancil leaving the docks without any ice or coolers for fish and empty nets every time he returned, word got around quick that the new move was to switch from trapping crabs to trapping flour. Now, the saltwater cowboys. The tactics to move flour into the US had also switched up. Instead of having vessels transporting product continent to continent, single pilot planes were being used to speed up the trip and ultimately avoid detection through the long journey by sea. Before Barry Seal became infamous for his powder smuggling with the Medellin cartel, he was originally transporting flour. Eventually, when he realized he could make a greater profit on powder, he fully transitioned, just like most of the Colombian dealers, right? But however, there were many of these more pilots who routinely took advantage of the new fleet of jobless fishermen than were ready for a new income stream, especially if they were going to be treated as criminals, whether they used their boats for illicit fishing or for the illicit trade. The Everglades city became directly tied to the international flour trade into Miami and the rest of the US. Planes would be flying in loads from Colombia and they would drop directly into the water below. This flour quickly became infamously known for its shape, its coloration, and overall quality. For those who remembered brick flour, this is the process that led to its production and widespread distribution. Now, the brick flour. The most popular method to transport large quantities of flour was to condense it using trash compactors, which would neatly spit out perfectly cubed bricks that were placed in brown burlap sacks. Kind of similar to a vacuum seal if they did it wrong, but that's obviously not exactly what I'm talking about. Now, these became known in the industry as square groupers, right? That's the name, why it comes from there. Literally being square packages that were fished out of the waters of the coast by newly recruited black market fishermen that were no longer allowed to fish. This process would greatly degrade the flower by crushing the plant and dropping it into the sea where it soaks up seawater, sometimes awaiting retrieval in the hot sun as these operations extended day and night while relying on the craftiness of the fishermen to evade law enforcement. After retrieval, the flower would then be moved into Miami's major hub or even vice versa. Everglades City had a single landing strip where planes have literally been landed and abandoned or even purposely crashed and left behind. The payout for some of these pilots were great enough for them to make that drop and escape with their payday without care of what happens to their plane. It was easier to avoid capture knowing that if law enforcement had them on their radar, they would likely be waiting for them at the airstrip. Now, Operation Everglades. At its peak in the 80s, it's estimated that around 75 tons per week, 150,000 pounds, was being moved, which prompted Operation Everglades, a 2-year investigation that led to the arrest of 28 people in a community of only 600 people, in addition to 300 more arrests in the surrounding rural area. Hundreds of fishermen boats were confiscated and backbone of the legal and black market economy of the area. What started as a 90-day investigation to scout out Miami's black market hub eventually turned into an indefinite stay, leading to the formation of the Fort Myer Task Force, which is in operation still today. Local police reached out when they started calculating up to 20 pounds in a single night from cargo ships moving in from South America, in addition to a single 50-ton bust with over 1,000 square groupers counted. After these seizures, law enforcement would create a fire stack to burn the flower. It would consist of wood, the flower itself, and then a layer of diesel fuel. Believe it or not, this is where the original term diesel came from for flower heads. Smugglers routinely would go into these burn stacks to retrieve any flower they could salvage and put back into the market. This isn't the first time Florida has decided to douse these plants with chemicals. In 1983, Florida decided they would begin spraying any flower fields they discovered with paraquat, a toxic herbicide, which the US also persuaded Mexico to use on their fields as well. However, this didn't stop growers from continuing to ship their tainted flower into the US. Tim McBride. Around this time, Colombia was providing the US with over 40% of its flour, with the majority of it coming through Tim McBride and his saltwater cowboys. Tim's crew of fishermen worked directly with smaller crews and several large Colombian criminal organizations. After Operation Everglades, 80% of the male population had been taken into custody, and many of which were part of McBride's overall operation. According to the retired police captain Tom Storer, this had a generational impact where the children who grew up here saw the government and police as the bad guys who became and took away everyone's job and arrested their dads. It was made apparent to him when he would speak in the area for Kids DARE program, noting the youth's overall dislike and mistrust for the police was pretty apparent. Now, we get into Randy Lanier. Another high-profile case after Operation Everglades was Randy Lanier, a race car driver who became the Indy 500 Rookie of the Year in 1986. However, he funded his career by smuggling flour into the US. He started back in the early 1970s with a Magnum Power boat where he helped unload other boats coming into Florida. Specifically, he was able to make quick trips from the Bahamas with 700-pound loads that he would bring back to sell itself. And from there, the boats got bigger and bigger, along with the massive amounts of flour as the operation evolved into a $300 million operation, shipping more than 600,000 pounds from Colombia. In October 1986, he was one of the 11 people charged in a Miami federal court by the DEA for engaging in major illicit flour and money laundering operations. The entire operation was unraveled due to a single delivery truck carrying a small quantity of flour that had broken down in southern Illinois and stumbled upon by a state trooper. Now, by the end of the 80s, flour had become the second largest cash crop in Florida, second only to citrus fruits, and with an estimated $400 million a year market. But now, the only place started to move inland into Miami indoor grow operations that often cut out the cartels altogether. What started off as a simple neighborhood home operations had evolved into the large-scale illicit market operations that we've seen in states like Oklahoma, where foreign entities are scooping up real estate. And definitely go check out that Oklahoma Trappers video. If you haven't seen it already, it's going to be linked down below in the description. Now, the siblings. One of the largest cash seizures in Miami history had over $20 million discovered in buckets hidden behind the walls of an indoor gardening business called Blossom's Experience. It was run by siblings Luis and Salma Gonzalez. Luis claimed he would make money on the side by teaching others how to grow flower themselves, while authorities claimed he was also growing and selling. According to DEA sources, he broke down his operations, noting multiple grow houses that produced 167 pounds of flower that took several men around 8 hours to process. Now, the indoor growing techniques had evolved far beyond typical soil and nutrients. Hydroponic grow houses were popular and were producing high-grade flower with US borders, directly inside of the major transport hubs like Miami. And these growers had an edge on profits with distribution and higher quality product than the masses of square groupers that invaded the US market. And this gave inland operations more funds to purchase massive suburban homes to flip into state-of-the-art, grow houses. But perhaps the most impressive network of these was inside of Miami's Mall of America. Federal agents confiscated 200 plants, revealing illicit operations with hidden storerooms in Savage Boutique, the Belly Dance Club, and an outlet store called Last Chance. Pretty nuts. Now, one story that turned into a major highlight in our DC Trappers video, which is also linked in the description down below, was about Nicholas Cunningham and his flower brand, the K-Gods. Definitely watch that video to get the full breakdown on how he made his stamp on the DC flower market. But considering, he started in LA, I shouldn't have been surprised to find out he had made moves down south in a city like Miami. He and his partner Simon Mills set up 2 Miami Beach K-Gods clothing shops where he had been accused of trapping flower out of. Now it's alleged, and we don't know that for sure, but over a 6-week period, undercover investigators purchased flower at both locations, which actually did lead to his arrest. Now, Ricky Williams, someone I've actually met, great guy. The decriminalization of flower in Florida in 2019 has brought about changes to the stigma that athletes like Ricky Williams, former Miami Dolphins running back, would have appreciated during his time in the NFL, or should we say times. Without breaking down the full timeline, he ended up testing positive for flower 5 times, but since then, he has become a respected speaker and advocate in the community, noting how the plant helped him cope with the pain that comes with the sport of football. And this has led to his own flower lifestyle brand, Heisman, and obviously play on his 1998 Heisman Trophy during the NCAA years. Now, still, international groups in Miami still have a modern stronghold in the illicit market economy. Cuban-American organizations based in Miami have spread their grow networks into houses in Gainesville, Jacksonville, and out of state into Georgia and the Carolinas. But let us know in the comments, where would you like the Trap Tree City series to cover next? Let us know down below in the comments. Also, we are in the process of expanding our team. We're looking for content creatives in all departments, from video editors, thumbnail editors, script writers, graphic designers, clothing designers, social media managers, and more. If you're a fan of our videos and feel you have the skills to help grow LMC to the next level, then make sure to follow me on all the social medias and email me with a subject line saying LMC team. Links are in the description. Please include a short cover letter explaining why you would be a good fit, your resume, and online portfolio with links to your previous work. I look forward to possibly working with you in the future. Like I said, contact me either via email or DM. And also, definitely check out what's going on when these shipments move on from Houston into the Atlanta hub in Atlanta's Trap Tree series video by clicking here. Anyways, make sure to support, hit the like button, share this. I really appreciate y'all. Big shouts out to Miami, big shouts out to Florida. Anyways, this is LMC signing out.
Luxury delivery vehicles with nugged out paint jobs, gifting shops serving local communities of federal employees, pop-up events, and even traditional businesses have helped shape DC's flower industry into the gray market capital of the US. The trap has been upgraded with business tactics that have evolved with modern legislation. Because of this reform, the gray market in DC has been warmly welcomed by a community where most of the nation's federal employees reside. Illegal gifting shops in our nation's capital have been serving DC's flower community so well, over 75% of the residents are in favor of keeping them around and reforming them further into the legal market. Law enforcement and lawmakers have hesitated in shutting down businesses and have signs that it could make moves to transition them with licensing. Welcome to the LMC Trap Tree series. Today, we're going to explore how Washington, D.C.'s legal flower market has allowed the traditional trappers and movers to thrive in arguably the most successful gray market in the country. And it all started because of one major loophole that was originally meant to allow people to pass around a joint at a party. Make sure to hit the like button, share this video, comment, and follow me on all the socials like Discord, Twitter, Instagram, and more. The links are down below. Anyways, this is LMC. Let's run it. With Initiative 71 in 2014, rec flower became available to adults in DC. This legalized possession for personal use in addition to allowing self-cultivation of up to 6 plants. However, lawmakers wanted to make sure it wasn't going to be illicit for someone to pass a joint around a party or even trade flower individually. So they decided that up to an ounce could be transferred from one person to another. One glaring issue with Initiative 71 is that it doesn't allow anyone to legally sell it. The combination of prohibiting its sales while allowing up to an OZ to be given away created a loophole that gave rise to 2 types of gray market transactions. The first type, donations, right? That's a traditional old school tactic from the West Coast, right? Which is common in states like California and Washington State, Seattle, my home city, back in the old medical market days when it was legalized. But basically, you have an unlicensed storefront that accepted monetary donations, and in return, you would receive flower as a gift. The whole idea of donations, by the way, is a complete cover. I mean, it's really just a term, it's a label, right? Doesn't really mean anything, but the size of the donation would decide how much flower you would get, right? Of course, there would be a menu showing you exactly what you would get per donation amount, but in DC, you have to be a little more slick about that as we learn about the story of a DC delivery service called K-Gods. Now, the K stands for flower, or a word that also means flower, that we can't really say because of, well, you know, it's YouTube. So bear with me on that. But before we go on, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, GoPack. GoPack is a fashion-centric, smell-proof travel bag that allows people that like to partake to be able to travel on the go. GoPack has a bunch of different designs while also having multiple different compartments and accessories like a rolling tray, a lock, a poker, a bunch of other stuff to help you partake more efficiently. If you would like to support the channel and also get yourself one of these, you can go to gopackstation.com and use my discount code LMC10 to get 10% off your order. Again, use my code LMC10 to get 10% off your order at gopackstation.com. Big shouts out to the homies over at GoPack for sponsoring this video. Now, let's jump back into the content. Nicholas K-God Cunningham ran a fleet of luxury vehicles from Lexus to Mercedes that are hard not to spot in DC. That's because he would wrap his rides with flower visuals of big, beautiful nugs that anyone looking for some green could easily see a mile away. Not to mention the words K-Gods in big, bold letters too. Now remember what K stands for, right? They're mainly known for their edibles, ranging from baked goods like brownies, cookies, and even muffins, to candy like rainbow airheads, and he operated without any of the legal hurdles that needed to be jumped in legal states like Colorado or California, where he came up with the idea for the delivery service back in LA. He was originally working in the music industry, mainly doing freelance gigs that left him wanting to step away and leap into the flower industry. A week after his birthday, he decided to go all in and started his company by spending the $2,500 he had for his rent to wrap his Lexus with the K-Gods branding. He gained hands-on experience with cultivation in LA and Denver, but whenever he was driving his nugged out Lexus through Hollywood, he noticed it wasn't really getting the level of attention he felt it deserved. In LA, legal flower was old news. having already been legalized for 2 decades by then, or at least with, rec and so forth. But the East Coast was a different story, especially with markets like DC and the rise of the flower donation culture that Cunningham was perfectly familiar with because he lived in California's old medical market. And combined with his edible niche, Cunningham launched K-Gods into a market that was more excited about his products when he compared the reactions to what he got back in Cali. At the same time, this would cause some problems that he would attribute to his branding and marketing strategy. Before we move on, I want to invite you to connect with me on your favorite social media. Follow me to stay updated on new LMC content. Links to all my platforms are in the description down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe here on YouTube. Now, let's get back into the DC trappers, and let's get back into the story of K-Gods. So K-Gods became so well known that Cunningham believes he was targeted to be made into an example due to his high publicity. For a year and 3 months, K-Gods freely operated with a sense that law enforcement had bigger things to worry about. His biggest concern at the time was parking tickets, if anything. He expanded his operation with a total of 3 luxury delivery vehicles, including a Mercedes-Benz, each decked out with a K-Gods flower wrap, along with their IG username and phone number. Cunningham felt fully protected with his business operations. His cars would have their usual pull-up spots for buyers to make their donations, and they were smart about hitting the nightlife districts around DC to pull in potential clientele. Eventually, DC Metro Police would send in 2 undercovers, leading to 2 counts of selling flower with 2 years probation. Now, after the court ruling, Cunningham walked out with an overall optimistic demeanor, saying they would be back in business the following day. But this time, they would switch up the business model. He would no longer be involved with direct operations and hired managers for each of his vehicles. From now on, none of the cars would actually carry any flower. Any donation must be made with a signed form that plainly states the money is strictly for donation and nothing else. After the donation is given, the driver radios back to the flower location, usually just blocks away, to give the heads up. This was to help solidify the idea that no flower was being exchanged for money. Still, the court saw this as a violation of Cunningham's probation, which led to 60 days in jail. But if this was a move to shut down the gray market by making an example of the K-Gods, it failed miserably. With his media coverage, Cunningham believes he was the catalyst to motivate others to try it themselves. Since then, the gray market has exploded in growth with many variations and tactics that have improved upon the K-Gods framework. Now, back in Cali, High Speed Delivery started a juice delivery service that offered flower on the side with donations to the business. They transitioned from Oakland into DC and quickly gained hundreds of customers under Initiative 71. The key difference between High Speed and K-Gods is that High Speed was actually selling a product completely separate from flower. The flower itself could then be clearly defined as a gift that simply came along with the purchase. Nice little loophole, as we could see. See, you can buy just juice, which is the face of the company, or you can add up to 2 tiers of donations to be gifted with flower. Now, the business claims the flower itself is supplied by local, greenhouse growers, but who also operate under Initiative 71. And this means these self-cultivators could gift flower with no license required. This gifting model offers a legal scapegoat that is more plainly obvious than pure donations. Now, DC gift shops have a whole new meaning with the introduction of Initiative 71. For example, a buyer can purchase a legit item, like a drink or a snack, for the price you would normally pay for an eighth. And with that drink or snack, you would receive a gift in the form of an eighth, or whatever quantity up to an OZ, depending on what you paid for the legit item. Another change High Speed Delivery made was to make all payment transactions online to avoid any cash business. They also keep a lower public profile than K-Gods with branded bags that look like deliveries from, let's say, a Grubhub or other delivery app companies. Most of their marketing is through a weekly newsletter. When it comes to their displays, the juice is front and center with their flower products taking a back seat. But business almost came to a crashing halt when media outlets began to pick up on High Speed's story with so many orders that their juice suppliers could not even keep up. Even worse, some suppliers no longer wanted to work with them after finding out how their juice was being used. But since then, High Speed's owner, David Ume, has been smart about pivoting. he started a sister company called Capital Juice with custom flavors inspired by DC's neighborhoods. This has allowed the company to expand into the refrigerated section of 3 DC bodegas that have zero ties to the flower market. The idea of shifting business operations online has been a play that has helped K-Gods into its current evolution in DC's gray market. The days of flashy, flower-covered luxury cars roaming the nightclub districts are over. Instead, Cunningham, the owner of K-Gods, runs everything off of social media with a phone number to link up for donations. And since then, staying low-key has been a success, proving his point that it was the level of attention that got him caught up. And this has given birth to, smart flower entrepreneurs that are looking to get into DC's market after seeing these business models in action. Red Eye is nearly identical with cookies instead of juice as their featured product. Dreamy is a motivational speech company that gives flower with their presentations. We are seeing innovative companies like this because compared to all the other markets in the US, DC has developed what can only be described as the capital of gray markets. Now, the founder of Dreamy, Ryan Ha, was compared to America's gray markets, saying that if Colorado represents America's low-risk, low-profit flower center, and New York City is the country's high-risk, high-profit center, then DC is the middle ground where low-risk meets high profits. And this is because Colorado is flooded with competition with high barriers to entry. And New York, well, if you haven't watched the New York Trap Tree video that I just did about how things are going out there, you can check the link in the description, by the way. But in DC, it's not just about the low risk of profit levels that makes it the gray market capital. It's the actual acceptance of it by the community that further separates it, which potentially could be the driving factor that transitions them into the legal market. Now, that's not to say that the DC PD isn't still busting some of these operations, right? Pop-up flower events have been becoming increasingly popular throughout DC. And these events are the gifting strategy while selling clothes, food, drinks, and so on. High-octane treats consider themselves as a I-71 compliant company that sells Pokemon cards and bracelets with gifts ranging from edibles to concentrates. In DC's Green Light District, Adams Morgan, it's a common to find sidewalk hustlers selling plain white tees for $60 with a gift. When DC started cracking down on pop-up events, many simply shifted to moving the events into private homes or private property instead of local bars and clubs. It's usually only the vendors that are targeted at these events. And when they want to, police will use ABRA, or the Alcoholic Beverage Regulation Administration, and Washington, D.C.'s Business Licensing Agency for their regulatory searches. Any criminal activity gets reported back to law enforcement for them to access search warrants. Instagram has been the most popular way to find out about DC's pop-up events, with vendors responding to DMs to confirm locations in advance. The pop-up market here is big enough to have websites dedicated to DC vendors and pop-up events you can go find that for yourself. But it's not only new entrepreneurs trying to get into the flower market that are using the gifting model to their advantage. Traditional DC bars, restaurants, clubs, and even art galleries have been known to dip their toes into the gifting culture and test the waters of the flower market with their own business, many of which have claimed to have noticed increases in their customers and revenue. But this was early on in DC's pop-up event scene. See, the first 2 years of I-71 could be considered the golden era of DC's gray market transition. The pop-up scene blended seamlessly with the nightlife scene. Word was spreading to the legacy corner dealers to stop what they were doing and pop up a table instead. Nightclub security was typically off-duty Metro PD, but when the pop-ups came around, they were able to pay twice the amount of the average club without a pop-up. There was very little fear of getting into any real trouble. Now, by August of 2017, the crackdowns began with dozens of pop-ups raided and over 250 arrested by February of 2019. The community blamed the raids on the increase in the number of robberies that were occurring at these events. A vendor by the name of Black Egyptian remembers his first time making real money after a late night at a pop-up house party in the upper Northwest. With most of the other vendors gone, he began loading his stuff into a trailer. But then a car pulled up with 3 armed robbers who jumped out asking how many people were left in the house. Security heard the commotion and came running over as the robbers took off with what they could. This left them helpless with no one to call due to them not wanting to report themselves at the pop-up event. Over time, licensed security guards stopped working these events because of the increase in arrests and robberies. Eventually, they were replaced by big bouncers that all were strapped up. Now, unfortunately, the Biden administration has consistently blocked the sale of DC flower through his spending bill writer in the budget that keeps DC from investing into the flower market. And this keeps stores like Mr. Nice Guys vulnerable to raids even when operating in the legal loophole. They've been raided multiple times, good news being their cases were dropped each time. Bad news is DC police have collected roughly $750,000 throughout those raids. Not a single dime has been returned to Mr. Nice Guys. H-Times reported back in October that Mr. Nice Guys has decided to sue the city to get their money back. Now, this doesn't include any property damage like the 2 ATMs they destroyed. We'll have to see how that turns out, but this is a typical thing that happens, especially in the gray markets where it's pretty much a shakedown, right? Anyone from the older markets that experience medical and transition into legal, I'm sure you guys are aware of what it's like if you ever owned a shop or anything. They come in, break everything, even if you leave the door open for them, it's a whole thing. But anyways, before we go on, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, GoPack, right? Like I mentioned earlier, GoPack is a fashion-centric, smell-proof travel bag that allows people that like to partake to be able to travel on the go. And GoPack has a bunch of different designs. I personally love the camo design that I got. There's also different sizes for, people, different needs. But they have multiple different compartments, accessories like a rolling tray, lock, a bunch of other stuff that I'm not mentioning here. But if you want to support the channel and also get yourself one of these, you can go to gopackstation.com and use my discount code LMC10 to get 10% off your order. Again, use my code LMC10 to get 10% off your order at gopackstation.com. And thank you to the homies over at GoPack for sponsoring this video. Now, let's jump back to the content. So DC has finally reached a point that it was ready to start shutting down the gifting business altogether. The 7 legal med shops in DC were dramatically hurt by the pandemic when cards began to expire without a way for patients to renew due to lockdown restrictions. Almost half of the patients in DC had their cards expire. To help this, MedCard validation was extended to 2022 and new cards issued would be valid for 2 years instead of 1. But in a more surprising effort to keep DC's legal dispos afloat, the mayor signed a legislation to allow any adult to self-certify themselves for medical flower without a doctor. Now remember, DC is not a state, but instead is a district that serves as the nation's capital. Because of this, any law passed by DC lawmakers actually goes directly to Congress itself, the National Congress obviously. And this is why DC laws are purposely written with loopholes to bypass federal laws that Congress doesn't pass. Weeks ago, Congress passed the DC Medicinal MJ Expansion Bill that eliminates licensing caps with more social equity promotion and moves forward with DC's development of consumption lounges and even flower cooking classes. Perhaps more importantly, it provides a path for the gray market to become licensed retailers. And this is a reversal from the original proposed legislation that would have created $30,000 fines for gifting shops. Luckily for them, that bill only lost by 1 vote. Most voters have chosen to simply convert them over to the legal market, and that's smart. It also turns out that 60% of the gray market flower shops owners are either Black or Hispanic, with many believing that DC has found an effective way to have its minority communities achieve social equity. And this is a very real thing, guys. I want to say from my own personal experience, I grew up in Seattle, and I one of the original legal rec markets. But I also, in high school, worked in the medical market, the OG medical markets of the West Coast and in Seattle. And I had a lot of, friends that were of all races, right? They were Black, brown, white, all that. And they owned different medical shops. But unfortunately, the Washington system, when they legalized, it destroyed the entire medical system. And I had plenty of friends, of all ethnicities, all races, all backgrounds that lost everything, that never came back and are still to this day not in the legal rec industry. And so, I've seen that happen, and I really do commend what DC is doing and that change that they're making. Because really, if we're looking at all of the markets collectively, the social equity aspect is not done well. And there is very little representation, I think, for people of color, but also just people also affected by the war on this plant. Now, before we wrap this up too, I want to say big shouts out to the homie Christian for helping out with this story. Definitely going to be doing some collabs here in the future with him, so I'm excited to, roll that out here in the future. And then also, definitely want to say shout out to Snickerdoodles and shout out to the Hippie Life crew. But anyways, big shouts out to everyone in DC. Big shouts out to my trappers. Big shouts out to all the hustlers, the entrepreneurs. Keep going, keep grinding. Y'all can do it. We can do it. The streets, well, it's pressure. And well, you're coal. And with enough pressure, what does that make? That makes diamonds. Go shine, keep grinding. And I can't wait to be talking to y'all soon. I can't wait to be visiting DC. Anyways, big love to everyone out there, everyone in the DMV. Seriously, very excited to go check that out. And like I said, also, we are in the process of expanding our team. We are looking for content creatives in all departments, from video editors, thumbnail designers, script writers, social media managers, and more. And also, if you're looking to pitch me a potential show that you want to do with me, don't hesitate to hit me up. And if you're a fan of our videos and feel like you have the skills to help grow LMC to the next level, then make sure to follow me on all the social medias, links are down below, and email me with the subject line LMC team at highdesignbusiness@gmail.com. If you could be so kind and include a little paragraph, short cover letter explaining why you would be a good fit, your resume, and online portfolio with links to your previous work, I would love that. I look forward to possibly working with you in the future, and don't be afraid to tap in with your boy. And like I said, I'm a big believer in the whole saying, you miss all the shots you don't take, so why not take it? Anyways, please check out the insane developments that are going on in Oklahoma. You can check that out in this video here. Anyways, this is LMC signing out. Michigan is experiencing record-breaking sales in their flower market, but how has this impacted the illicit market? Specifically in cities like Detroit, and have been denied access to the adult legal market until recently. The counties surrounding the city have done well with their rec market, while Detroit has had most of the market potential pushed into the city's black and gray markets, or forced to shop outside of the city, with these dollars pumping up the surrounding areas. During the 2020 pandemic, 70% of purchases were still being made outside of retail stores, with 20% of the population participating in all sales. Meanwhile, the rest of the world was experiencing a change in society that had already been the way of life in Detroit. Welcome to the next episode in our Trap Tree City series, where we cover the trappers, smugglers, and hustlers in the illicit and gray markets. You'll want to buckle up for this one. We're heading into Motor City, Detroit, Michigan. Anyways, please make sure to the like button, hit the subscribe button, follow us on all social medias. Links are down below in the description. This is LMC. Let's run it. Before we move on with the video, I want to say a big thank you to our sponsor, GoPack. GoPack is a fashion-centric, smell-proof accessory bag that allows for everyday partakers to be able to organize everything and be able to be on the go, hence the name GoPack. And they got all different types of stuff in these bags, right? You got your rolling tray, you got a lock for it, you got a poker, you got all different types of stuff, a bunch of extra stuff that I'm not even naming in this really, but a bunch of different compartments as well. It's smell proof, like I said. It was created by engineers actually that just also have a love for the smoke. And I'm a big fan of the way the way it looks, the way it feels, and the exact overall layout of it, right? You also got the miniature version of the GoPack. There's a bunch of other versions of the GoPack at gopackstation.com. If you want to support my channel, also get yourself some really, really dope gear. I want you guys to go to gopackstation.com and use my discount code LMC10 so you're gonna get 10% off your order. Let's jump back into the content. Before legalization, Michigan had many ports and entry points for Canadian smugglers to bring their product down from cultivation hotspots like British Columbia. I talked about this in the Trap Tree video I did about my hometown of Seattle, where I go into detail about BC and the early trappers in the Pacific Northwest. But Detroit, being near the border of Canada, was also an easy target for trappers looking for a major hub to cash in on. Meanwhile, major shipments from northern Cali and Mexico were being flown in. States like Arizona also acted as Mexican distribution hubs to smuggle flower using U-Hauls, moving trucks, vans, and so forth, with the US interstate system to transport directly into cities like Detroit. During Detroit's golden era of smuggling, the most common flower pushed here were gotta be the different perp varieties. The perp in particular came in from the Bay Area. Though it originated from southern Humboldt County, it moved into San Francisco when a grower gifted a Granddaddy perp plant to Ken Estes, who cultivated it into a popularity. After a motorcycle accident that left Ken paralyzed from the neck down, he met a Vietnam War vet that offered him some flower and completely changed his life. Since then, the Granddaddy Purple has grown, or the GDP, has grown exponentially due to the illicit market's love for its look. Those days, it was rare to see such deep purple colors, which made it easy for it to basically market itself to buyers. But over time, more and more people have become used to a wide spectrum of hues, but the plant that became rooted in the 90s hip-hop culture had a direct influence on the marketing throughout the eras of perp genetics all the way into the modern-day exotics that you find in the streets of Detroit. In the early days, whatever flower popped off in the Bay, like GDP, could easily pop off in a parallel city entrenched in hip-hop like Detroit. As time went on, more of the OG Cali cultivars started to hit the Detroit market, with Larry OG having a run only to be replaced by the OG, which really started dominating nationally going into the 2000s. Now, it was clear up to the point that the Cali and Michigan illicit markets operated hand in hand, but in 2008, after medical legalization, northern Michigan was also becoming a hotspot for its own illicit operations. And this has been the case, honestly, for the last 3 decades prior. But anyway, the state created a flower caregiving program that allowed anyone 21 or older to grow 12 plants. But if you live in a home with multiple adults, you were allowed an additional 12 plants per person. Near central Michigan in Saginaw, a home was raided that resulted in 1,200 plants seized. Unless there were 100 people living in that house, then I'm pretty sure these were meant for the illicit market. Now, during the time, there was no licensing required to become a caregiver. You simply had to register yourself as one with the state. However, regulations made adjustments to require a special license that would place them into the state's seed-to-sale flower tracking program. But this hasn't stopped illicit growers from bypassing that altogether. Some would consider this territory's high concentration of outdoor grow ops as the Humboldt of the Midwest. Humboldt being the outdoor grow op mecca in the US. And that has actually resulted in award-winning quality cultivation. See, by 2014, the Gorilla Glue had been cultivated to its peak in Michigan, winning high awards in both Michigan and even LA's market. Michigan trappers now had an award-winning name that they could push across the country, spreading the popularity of glue into the top 10 bestsellers as recently as last year, according to Leafly. Now, before we move on, I want to invite you to connect with me on your favorite social media platforms, right? Follow me to stay updated on new LMC content, and please make sure to connect, like I said, on another platform at the very least, because you never know what could happen here on YouTube. Anyway, the links to all my platforms are in the description, and don't forget to like and subscribe here on YouTube. Now, let's get back into Detroit's trappers and smugglers. On the first day of legalized flower in Michigan, only 4 dispensaries were available, with 3 in Ann Arbor and 1 in Morenci. This left few lucky shops to rake in almost $250,000 sales in one day. But this also left things wide open for the illicit market to infiltrate without such restriction to their promoting or business practices. Illegal delivery services and storefronts began popping up exponentially after adult use became legal, almost immediately. It was common to find fully functional websites and Facebook pages dedicated to illicit home operations. Others took advantage of websites like Maps, where they could advertise their products and services without any proof of licensing. This is something states like California are in the process of legislating against in the near future. Those were the days of traditional plastic sandwich baggies or Ziploc bags. Nowadays, many caregivers have started moving their product out of plastic sandwich bags into sleek Mylar packs with their own branding, while others imitate the well-known industry brands.
especially when it comes to the popular brands supported in the hip hop communities in both Detroit and back in Cali. And along with those modern brands and trappers came more exotic hybrids and genetics. Right now, Detroit's most popular flower on the streets is Lemon Cherry Gelato. It's also popular in DC, which is another Trap Tree Series video I have coming up, so make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. Now, from 2013 to 2018, there was a 5-year boom in Detroit's illicit flower market. Detroit's land bank program allowed people to buy properties for literally $1,000. Caregivers were buying up the vacated, rundown properties in Detroit and turned them into dispos. Some kept things simple with cardboard menus with $5 flower posted for sale, while others put in high-level effort to generate potential millions with vertically integrated operations. The Trap was bringing life back to the neighborhoods, with income flowing in to revamp storefronts with fresh paint and signage, with more and more abandoned buildings and homes being converted. Residents here almost immediately began to notice Detroit turning around after medical flower became available for trappers to start making major moves inside their own city, rather than relying on the imports from Cali, Canada, or Mexico. There was a direct correlation that could be seen between the renovated areas in the city and the locations of the trap houses. Now, Detroit has been some interesting plays in the flower market here, with the city flooded with illicit activity. The market was so saturated here that in 2021, a car running a red light made a garbage truck swerve into a brick building, knocking down the entire corner section, revealing one of the hundreds of illicit grow ops in the city. In March last year, a junkyard was faking paperwork to cover their illegal chop shop / grow op, and they were partially out stolen vehicles, accumulating around $100,000 in parts and compacting the leftovers while operating a grow op in a separate building, quite literally seeing a merging of the famous name for Detroit, Motor City, and this new illicit market / legal market that has come about. But perhaps the most brazen was a guy who attached a vending machine onto the side of his house in West Detroit. It was state of the art, complete with a touchscreen and the ability to take credit cards and even Apple Pay. He said he ran this machine for 4 years, making around $2,000 a day. The only reason he was caught was because someone tipped the ATF off that there were illicit firearms on the property. After a couple of months of collecting evidence through the vending machine and obtaining a search warrant, they found 18 firearms, including a sawed-off shotgun and several units of flour. Now, still, these plants are moving much further than Detroit or Michigan, especially in surrounding states like Illinois and Ohio. Illinois residents complain about high taxes and pricing from growers that is getting passed down to the buyer. At the same time, Ohio's flour is nearly twice as much as Michigan's. It was and still is incredibly common for people to cross the border from Illinois or Ohio to pick up their flour and illicitly head back home. Shops in Grand Rapids, Ann Arbor, and Detroit have claimed up to 50% of their clientele coming in from Ohio, and this has given plenty of opportunity for smugglers in Michigan to transport into bordering states due to the high demand for illicit product in these legal markets. In January of 2022, more than $3 million worth of flour was seized in Michigan's Port Huron that was bound for Columbus, Ohio, in a food shipment trunk. Let us know in the comments if you want us to cover Columbus or any other city in Ohio in this series. Definitely let us know down in the comments. Now, but according to Detroit police, there was a surge of contraband that emerged from the pandemic's lockdown, travel restrictions, that the illicit market took advantage of. Many Detroit residents would agree that the global pandemic was somewhat of a global introduction to the way of life here in their city. Before the pandemic in Detroit, there was nowhere to go, with stores shut down permanently, buildings abandoned with no real place for families to gather. There were no real jobs here, at least not the big corporate jobs paying six-figure checks. And with the introduction of the rec market, even the traditional market took a major hit. The supply is more available than ever from the legal market. And as Detroit's surrounding areas continue to see economic growth, the legal dispensaries of the suburbs are taking in most of the profits. At the same time, the overall flower sales in Michigan are breaking records, but the results also led to record high criminal activity. In May of 2022, 12 people were charged with breaking into 21 dispos in just a 6-week period going into 2023. 13 delivery drivers were robbed at gunpoint, with some assaulted and even having their car stolen. The delivery robberies came during record-breaking sales in Michigan's flower market, hitting the almost $250 million in 1 month going into 2023. Plus, criminals are more willing to commit crime on shops and services that aren't playing by the rules. These crimes have a high chance of going unreported, with a risk of having their store audited by the state. But even the legal shops are targeted because of their lack of access to traditional banking. This leaves most shops operating with cash only. But recently, we've started seeing many licensed shops starting to accept debit and even credit cards as a temporary workaround using a number of different methods, but that's for another video. But this hasn't been great news for the medical market either. It has seen a 60% drop year over year, with the market now sitting at around $10 million. Meanwhile, rec has increased by 60% year over year. And this is partially due to a lot of the shops deciding to convert from med and rec to rec only or limited medical. The main strategy has been simply to give medical patients a medical discount when shopping for rec products. Essentially, they cover the added 10% excess tax and that the medical patient usually would pay. Combined with the larger selection of recreational products and the shrinking med promo, we are seeing the market shift to a more so just complete rec sales market. Now, overall, Michigan's flower market has seen prices plummeting since legalization. What started at $500 in OZ has dropped down to $80 on average. This has definitely caused problems for some of the big corporate brands like Skymint. Skymint is one of the largest vertically integrated operators in Michigan. They control 24 storefronts with 3 indoor grow ops. However, they're only pulled in about $110 million of the $263 million they're projected to their investors. Tropics LP, a Canadian investment firm, is suing, claiming they're owed more than $127 million. A New York investment firm is also suing their affiliates, alleging misrepresentation of financials and management. This highlighting the risks associated with the cost of doing business in the legal market compared to the illicit market, and the cost that customers aren't willing to pay in a high-end dispensary. In 2019, there were roughly over 2 times the number of illicit shops compared to the legal ones. Once rec was available, legit shops in Detroit like the Reef claimed to have lost 30 to 40% of their sales to the illicit market. Michigan has sent cease and desist orders statewide to suspected trap shops. The state issued a warning to all illicit operations to cease business by December 31st in 2019 to remain eligible for a legal license. With the average shop bringing in 6 figures of untaxed monthly revenue, it was a warning that wasn't heavily acknowledged. In some cities, it's much easier to regulate due to them completely opting out of the flower market altogether. So in cities like Canton, any shop selling flower whatsoever is getting shut down. There are 1,764 communities in Michigan that have opted out and counting. This makes the licensing fee more rare and valuable than they already are, with a $6,000 application fee and a $66,000 licensing fee. Now, for years, Detroit stalled in the med market while the rest of the state transitioned direct. This created a dead zone in Detroit that led to its suburbs and surrounding counties like Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne reaping the benefits of the new flower industry instead of the city itself. For someone like Kimberly Scott, a 41-year-old former history school teacher and nurse, this would be the root cause of the closure of her dispo within only 6 months of opening. She started off as a caregiver and transitioned into a dispensary called Chronic City. But being a med shop in a city not allowed to sell to adults, well, she had to compete with people willing to travel elsewhere for their purchase. Not to mention, at this time, the city counted 240 gray market dispos, noting that only a small handful were even owned by any Detroit residents. Also, strict zoning laws keep entrepreneurs like Kimberly from even purchasing ideal locations in the city once recreational flower was legalized. Investors with deeper pockets came in and bought up most of the best properties in Detroit's legal green zone. Now, this has been a major issue for the new social equity recipients in Detroit. 50% of the licenses in Detroit have been reserved for those disproportionately impacted by flower laws. As long as you've lived in Detroit for over 10 years or are partnering with someone who is willing to be the 51% owner, then low income or previous flower convictions won't disqualify you from the program. Just days ago, as I made this video, the second Black-owned Detroit Legacy dispensary opened. This was literally just a week after the first one. And this is directly due to 34 applicants being approved to open last December. High-profile flower shop and Nuggets Flower in Detroit have just the beginning of a new recreational market in Detroit. But Detroit's population is 85% Black. Michigan's overall has a 14% Black population, with only 3% operating as owners in the flower industry. Now, really quickly too, when we talk about different smuggling routes that are typically used into Detroit, we typically see with the different eras of smuggling styles have occurred with Detroit. Same thing, just like everywhere else in the country, right? We started with initially, you started to see U-Hauls, then it went to mailing, then now it's pretty much gone to people, chartering private planes. And all 3 of those tactics are still used today. But definitely wanted to mention that before we jump into the very last part of this video. Now, Detroit has a long history with social movements stemming from the counterculture movement that has spread across the entire US by the 60s and 70s. Around this time, a counterculture leader in Detroit, John Sinclair, was a major flower supporter and believed in its decriminalization. However, a female undercover cop would bust him for 2 J's, resulting in a 10-year sentence. The sentencing was meant to serve as an example to the community, however, that ended up backfiring entirely. This garnered national news coverage, capturing the attention of more than 15,000 that showed up in Ann Arbor, just 40 miles outside of Detroit, for the John Sinclair Freedom Rally. Among those that spoke and are performed at the rally included John Lennon, Yoko Ono, Stevie Wonder, and others, including another Black Panther Party co-founder, Bobby Seale. Literally 3 days after the rally, Sinclair was released from prison, spending less than 3 of the 10 years of his sentence. Inspired by the success of the John Sinclair Freedom Rally in 1972, Ann Arbor held the first annual Hash Bash. And this was an event that celebrates the plant and brings together enthusiasts from around the country with music, live speakers, food, and of course, flower. Now, definitely let me know in the comments what flower events you've been to and which ones do you want me to come to in the near future. I definitely am going to make it out to Hash Bash next year. I heard it was very, very fun this year from my friends. Now, also, before we wrap this up, we are in the process of expanding our team. We're looking for content creatives in all departments, from video editors, thumbnail designers, script writers, social media managers, and more. If you're a fan of our videos and feel you have the skills to help grow LMC to the next level, then make sure to follow me on all the social medias and email me with the subject line LMCteam at highdesignbusiness@gmail.com. Please include a short cover letter explaining why you would be a good fit, and your resume and online portfolio with links to your previous work. I look forward to possibly working with you in the future. Like I said, either email me or DM me. And also, don't forget to check out the Trap Tree videos I did covering my hometown about Seattle's trappers and smugglers. You can watch it by clicking on this video here. Anyways, big shouts out to Detroit, shout out to the D, big shouts out to Michigan, and big shouts out to the Midwest. Anyways, this is LMC signing out.
Thank you to our sponsor, GoPack. GoPack is a fashion-centric, smell-proof accessory bag that allows for everyday partakers to be able to organize everything and be able to be on the go, hence the name GoPack. And you know, they got all different types of stuff in these bags, right? You got your rolling tray, you got a lock for it, you got, you know, a poker, you got all different types of stuff, a bunch of extra stuff that I'm not even naming in this really, but a bunch of different compartments as well. It's smell proof, like I said. It was created by engineers actually that just also have a love for the smoke. And you know, I'm a big fan of the way, you know, the way it looks, the way it feels, and the exact overall layout of it, right? You also got the miniature version of the GoPack. There's a bunch of other versions of the GoPack at gopackstation.com. If you want to support my channel, also get yourself some really, really dope gear. I want you guys to go to gopackstation.com and use my discount code LMC10 so you're gonna get 10% off your order.
The legal flower market boom in Illinois led to over $3 million on its first day of sales, which took neighboring states like Michigan weeks to do. But since then, early entrepreneurs have struggled to compete against the illicit market due to licensing regulations and high pricing, especially when we look at Chicago with its high levels of gang activity and the city's hustlers' mentality. The trap is thriving here, but for how long? Will it still be sustainable as Illinois' lagging green market finally begins to catch up? Welcome to another episode in the LMC Trap Tree series, a sub-series of high design history, where we're going to explore the Windy City's trappers and smugglers in this newly legalized market. Because in many ways, the streets are still extremely viable play with flower in the shot. Please make sure to the like button, share this, subscribe, comment down below, and follow me on all the social medias. The links are down below in the description. Anyways, this is LMC. Let's run it. Chicago's O'Hare International Airport acts as a global smuggling hub with more travelers passing through than LAX. But after Illinois legalized, Chicago PD has publicly announced that no domestic travelers caught with flower at either O'Hare or Midway Airport would be arrested. You'll even find an amnesty box at the terminals to toss away your flower before boarding. But of course, these are hardly used, with literally only a few dozen collections being made in a year out of tens of millions of travelers. However, literally days before legalization, federal agents would get a tip about a private jet suspected to land with large amounts of contraband, including flower, pills, and firearms. On board was rising underground rapper Juice WRLD. Well, at this time, he'd kind of become, world famous. But Juice WRLD, who at the time had the #2 hit in the country with Lucid Dreams, well, things would end tragically when he decided to swallow as much evidence as he could, leading to his passing at the age of 21. But also, what would be, one of the other things that would come out when it comes to this whole story is that people in his group were, having tons of different pounds of flour on board the plane, which is a typical, tactic used by trappers, right? Getting your own airplane and, trafficking it, wherever it may be, all over the country or the world, right? But RIP to Juice WRLD. He will be missed and his music will live forever. Now, before legalization, most of the illicit flower entering Chicago was coming in from California, but Michigan's legalization has been introduced to the illicit market supply simply due to logistics, with Chicago being only an hour drive. This has opened up opportunities for individual hustlers to upsell Michigan's lower priced flower, while traditional movers with the Cali connections continue to ship their packs with the options to bring legit West Coast brands to the Midwest market. Of course, this all depends on your connect, whether they're tossing you fake packs or the real deal. Most are simply ensuring they are pushing quality for their street buyers. Depending on the buyer, we know for sure the dealers have been raising the prices alongside the legal market. This really isn't anything new for most dealers, though. Some people get the homie price while others get taxed. It's just how it goes. But with the introduction of the legal market, it was given the streets more opportunity to capitalize, with new buyers willing to tap in, but not happy with the price at the dispo. After tax, the average price of an eighth is sitting at about $63, with $80+ eighths hitting the shelves, making it some of the highest priced flower in the nation. Meanwhile, Colorado, the average price is $32. Still, even with the extra room to upcharge, some dealers have begun seeing the impact of the illegal market on their cash flow. One dealer who's been in the game since 2013 says sales have dropped by 25%, going from about $80,000 down to around $60,000 a year. By the end of this year, it's expected that the illicit market will be surpassed in legal sales for the first time, with $2.3 billion versus $2 billion from the illicit market. Now, this could be a turning point in the legal market pricing for buyers as well. Right now, there are less than 24 licensed cultivators. 7 companies control 60 of the 110 stores in the state. And we are starting to see a major consolidation with companies headquartered in Chicago, like Cresco and Verano. And these are multi-state operators, ranking as 2 of the largest seed-to-sale companies in the US. Cresco has the maximum number of licenses, with plans to buy Columbia Care, a Manhattan flower company, for $2 billion, essentially positioning Cresco and Verano as the Coke and Pepsi in the flower industry, right? Because of the limited number of cultivators, the larger companies like Cresco have been accused of price manipulation, purposely keeping the wholesale cost high for dispos. And this has been a fuel for the illicit market to continue on. Even as prices come down, most are predicting that the illicit market is still going to be around $1 billion by 2025. Now, most of the illicit market flower activities remain low-key, with home grows, underground events, and delivery services in Chicago. It's not as common to find the type of illicit shops that you find in New York, but they absolutely exist. More often, you'll find shops using the Delta 8 loophole to sell, regular, flower products. But because these products aren't tested, it's unusual for these products to actually contain high levels of traditional Delta 9 flower. But a more explicit example would be a pop-up shop on 1276 West Grand Avenue, which was selling, pre-rolls, cards, edibles, and, magic fungi. Because of the fungus, right, they were hit with an additional felonies on top of their own flower products. And the popularity of the fungus has already been a part of the counterculture and flower community, especially those who prefer natural substances when it comes to psychedelics. And you can find a variety of these options at some of the Chicago's underground parties and events, from raw caps to chocolate-covered, edibles. And last year, Chicago PD took down 2 unsanctioned events back to back, resulting in 5 separate dealers getting busted for flower and fungi. Now, since legalization, you really have more of the local trappers operating things compared to before. The largest bust in Illinois history was before legalization back in 2010, which was a front company that was set up in Rockdale, Illinois, south of Chicago. And they were shipping 6 railroad cars filled with almost 11 tons of flower from Mexico. Now, Texas Border Patrol made the discovery with their canines that sniffed out the bundles packed in a masonry dust. After contacting the railroad company, they arranged to track the train all the way to a storage warehouse in Chicago Heights. Each of the cars were unloaded with forklifts to move the packs onto a flatbed trucks and then transported to a smaller storage facility near the warehouse over the course of 4 days. Nowadays, it's not worth the risk to move large quantities into legalized markets. Most of the movement is left up to the street trappers and hustlers. This is especially true in areas like the south side of Chicago, where there is a lack of legal options compared to the north side. Now, this is because Illinois' strict zoning restrictions can vary from one municipality to another. Flower businesses can't be banned from operating, but zoning restrictions can make business establishments difficult. This drives up the price of the few properties and areas that qualify, that alone alter the landscape, or who could start business and who couldn't, with a higher financial requirements. And with higher financial requirements, you absolutely want the best location possible to make the money back, right? Well, before 2022, you had to gamble with a lottery system that would decide what location would be available to you. That only made things more unattractive for solo entrepreneurs. However, the larger companies that are trying to simply capture the market share, well, it's not as much of an issue for them. Thankfully, they stopped doing that back in 2021. Still, though, the central business district of downtown Chicago remains off limits, so your only options are either go north or head down south. Right now, the north side has nearly twice the number of dispensaries as the south side. And the south side of Chicago has always been a major battleground when it comes to the plant. During, alcohol prohibition, flower was actually legal. It was especially common to find Chicago's jazz nightclub scene when they were more commonly called jazz cigarettes. The steel mills in the south side operated for almost a century with cheap labor from Mexican immigrants. Many of these workers migrated with flower, becoming a major source of the spread of the plant into Chicago. However, when the Great Depression hit, many Americans were fearing job competition and welcomed Illinois' 1931 prohibition on the plant. This led to the arrests of many minority workers who used the plant recreationally, and a history of overcriminalization that has lasted into modern times. To put this into perspective, the year flower was legalized in Illinois, Chicago was still arresting 3 times more blacks than all other races combined for flower-related offenses in 2020. Illinois ranked 3rd among states with a 7.5 times more arrests of blacks than whites for possession. Meanwhile, ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union, found that even though white motorists were pulled over less, they were the ones found with the higher percentage of contraband. While overall arrests have gone down, blacks still remain as a target compared to their white counterparts. And before we go on, I just want to thank our friends over at getseedsrighthere.com. Get 10% off your entire order at getseedsrighthere.com by using my code LMC10 at checkout. Get high quality clones and seeds at getseedsrighthere.com. Now, let's jump back into the video. So, in areas like the 4th Ward in Chicago, the flower market was pitched as a possible solution to social equity issues involving the plant. Their last alderman was federally indicted on racketeering, bribery, and attempted extortion. This is how the home of the largest wealth gap in Chicago. Chicago's wealthiest households have 206 times more income than the poorest. Paul Pearson designed this campaign for the 4th Ward alderman around many social equity concepts with the flower industry and the community. He claims most members of the community don't even realize these programs exist because the money allocated for them isn't actually reaching the communities. Unfortunately, Paul Pearson was knocked out of the running due to his technical formatting and filling errors that would be too costly for him to challenge in court. The money it would take to fight in court would have been the money it would have taken to run the campaign, unfortunately. Now, Chicago has continually struggled to find and maintain black leadership in its communities. During the 1960s and 70s, influential figures began rising up, capturing the attention of government groups like COINTELPRO, which is the controversial counterintelligence program that was forced to be dismantled due to the public's disapproval of tactics, even though COINTELPRO in a different form is still happening to this day, right? But the COINTELPRO movement, right? They were accused of infiltrating and instigating criminal activity to disrupt the counterculture movement, such as the Black Panther Party. One of my favorite leaders of all time, literally, somebody that we could probably use today, very much so. But the leader of the Illinois chapter, Fred Hampton, the leader of the Black Panther Party, was assassinated during a Chicago police raid on his apartment at the age of 21. He was considered as a charismatic and outspoken leader that advocated for civil rights and social justice. He united all of the different races as well under one banner, under, a pro-worker message, which is extremely threatening to the power structure at B that's still today. His death led to widespread controversy, with allegations of the government successfully silencing him. Other influential figures at the time in Chicago weren't considered to be as positive of an impact in the communities, at least when it's all said and done. Jeff Fort was co-founder of the Black Pea Stones gang, which became the L. Ronkin organizations that was known for trafficking and violence. However, the FBI tracked phone conversations, financial and travel records that provided evidence of conspiring to commit domestic acts of terror in the U.S. on the behalf of Libya. Libya had a history of financially supporting anti-American and anti-Western groups under Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi was known as a dictator that violated human rights and financed terror against his own people and other countries around the world. Eventually, NATO drones destroyed key parts of the convoy that was traveling in, leaving him vulnerable for capture by his own people, who beat, stabbed, and shot and executed him. That's called the Arab Spring, right? Back in 2013, I think. And Jeff Fort, was sentenced to 80 years, becoming the first gang leader to be prosecuted under federal terrorism statutes. Like Jeff Fort, Larry Hoover was a gang leader with a reputation for defying the system, but also used the Gangster Disciples gang for trafficking and violence in the community. And it was also used as a, protection, system, as well as a way to gain economic wealth. Right. But by 1973, Larry was already serving a 150 to 200 year sentence for the murder of William Young, a dealer who had accused of stealing from the gang. Still, while in prison, he managed to rebrand the Gangster Disciples, or the GDs, into an organization called Growth and Development. It didn't take long for the community and police to realize it was the same old gang being run by Larry Hoover from his cell via phone calls, coded letters, and prison visits. And perhaps the biggest giveaway was that all of the same leadership roles from the gang were identical to the new organization. Now, the 1970s RICO Act made it so that the government could prosecute gang leaders for the criminal activity their organization commits. This results in new life sentences without parole. And this also resulted in a community that was primed for disorganized criminal leadership that would perpetuate into modern times. With the introduction of the legal flower market, this was seen as a new avenue for social equity programs to bring back leadership and revenue into these communities. Unfortunately, many have complained these social equity programs haven't been robust or transparent enough to actually help the minorities they claim to support. For one, these programs eliminate all federal funding for the individual due to the plant still being federally illegal. This means no subsidized housing or food assistance if you decide to take a leap into the legal market. Besides that, Illinois decided to craft their own social equity criteria with no regards to race. Now, the idea that a race-neutral social equity program would be able to include more individuals, but with limited licensing, the results actually excluded many of the people they claimed that they were trying to help. In 2021, there were only 75 social equity licenses available across the entire state, To qualify, you had to complete a questionnaire that awarded your points based on your level of qualification, social equity businesses and operations, security and record keeping, and flower knowledge and experience awarded the highest amount of points out of the 250 points available. And the smallest amount of points was given to the category for veterans with only 5 points. However, this resulted in hijacking the social equity program into a veterans program instead. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that to a certain degree, right? Shout out to our veterans. Thank you guys for our service. But with only 75 slots available and thousands applying, only perfect scores received the opportunity for licensing. And this means you absolutely had to be a veteran in order to qualify, even though it was only worth 5 points. And this left non-veterans with perfect scores with zero chance to compete. Now, this is where it gets fishy, right? Scoring social equity license applicants in Illinois has been a major issue altogether. KPMG Consulting, which is a big company from Canada, won a no-bid contract for $4.2 million to be the official flower reviewer for the entire state, or the application reviewer and scorer. However, controversy soon came when it was found out that one of the risk management consultants with KPMG was granted a license under the EHR Holdings. It was revealed that Hamd Kamal, the KPMG employee, along with former Chicago Police Superintendent Terry Hillard, were both listed as managers in this company that was looking to snatch up 5 licenses. The governor, J.B. Pritzker, had a spokeswoman who gave the governor support of KPMG and the situation, saying KPMG, quote, had a plan in place to ensure any potential conflicts of interest were addressed and did not influence the process, end quote. They went on to say that, quote, they are a large international firm ensuring that there aren't any conflicts of interest. And having an employee of the reviewing company, which no other company was allowed to compete with, in addition to having the police superintendent of one of the most over-criminalized populations in the history of the US, really doesn't look very good for social equity, let alone the branding of a flower company, right? It just overall smells of some fishy behavior going on. And that same business that Chicago is still punishing minorities for 3 times the rate, I'd say that it's a conflict for anyone, and that who are interested when that is the case. And it didn't take an entire team of international consultants to help me come to that conclusion. So Illinois, if you're looking for cultural consulting, well, we got you here at LMC. Tap in with your boy. Speaking of the governor, how many of y'all have heard of the Chicago cartel? A lawsuit filed by True Social Equity in Flower claims the state is being controlled by well-connected companies linked to 3 wealthy families in Chicago: the Pritzker, the Wrigley, and the Kovler families. And well, you already know Governor Pritzker, whose family also operates Hyatt hotels. If you're from Chicago or even St. Louis, then you're definitely familiar with the Wrigley family. And they are the makers of Wrigley Gum, and of course the home of the Chicago Cubs is named after them, Wrigley Field. And they're also heavily involved, the Wrigley family, or starting to be involved in the flower industry, right? But Ben Kovler is the CEO of Green Thumb Industries, a Chicago company that has found their way into 14 different states, including New York's newly legalized market. By the way, we have a bunch of different content covering the New York market, whether it's the trappers, smugglers, or the, different regulations for retailers. So go check out those videos if you get the chance. But because of their national operations, right, Green Thumb is able to pull in nearly $80 million in a single quarter. This might be the leverage that True Social Equity claims is being used to keep flower prices extraordinarily high. We're talking pricing as high as $4,000 for a pound compared to $200 to $300 in Cali. But perhaps the biggest twist to this is Governor Pritzker and Akerna, a publicly traded flower software company allegedly controlled by the Pritzker family. Supposedly, the software tracks prices, supply, and demand in the state flower markets that is fed back to the Chicago cartel. It's even been alleged that they even have their own board members who sit on the board of competing companies. Nothing has or probably ever will come out of this. It's likely this lawsuit was dismissed, as I've not found any other information on its past in its announcement almost a year ago. Specifically, there were inaccuracies with the lawsuit, with True Social Equity claiming Akerna is a plant-touching base operator, when in fact they are actually a publicly traded company with all of their board members listed for everyone to see. So they messed that one up. but no other parties involved have ever made any further comments about the situation. There have been other complaints from businesses operating outside of the state who have tried applying for licensing and failed. Sozo, a Michigan-based company, filed a lawsuit claiming that they were unfairly made their company ineligible to win a social equity license. However, this actually only confirmed one of the issues I believe that was happening in their industry. When it comes to these social equity licenses, who is applying for them? Well, let's break down that Sozo's original strategy. Apparently, they went into the areas of the state where people were deemed disproportionately impacted by the war on flower to hire as employees. From there, the company is able to qualify as a social equity applicant by using those employees to represent the company. And this is exactly what I suspected with many of these large companies attempting to buy up the social equity licenses. Unfortunately, when you look at who's actually at the top of these companies, it's not the ones who were disproportionately impacted. Instead of social equity ownership, we're seeing social equity employment. If successful social equity ownership is not the goal of your social equity program, then it's really just a job placement program. In case you need me to really spell it out for you, this process of white business owners buying their way into social equity status has been dubbed the quote slave master clause. However, Sozo actually dropped the lawsuit claiming that their suit would do more harm than good by challenging the new licensing system. Governor Pritzker updated social equity licensing from needing a perfect score with the 5 points from veterans to only needing 85% of the max score to qualify. And this also created 2 additional lotteries with easier levels to qualify to inject even more diversity. Because of this new system, it narrowed the definition of a social equity applicant, which disqualified Sozo. Still, even when someone deserving actually receives a social equity license, they are pushed into a market that is almost designed to fail. This is why we are seeing so many of these black shop owners selling off their licenses, especially when out-of-state buyers are offering millions of dollars to take your failing business off your hands, or a business that you haven't even started, but you have the license. And after over a year of licensing in 2021, there were 0 majority black-owned dispensaries in Chicago. At one point, there was a single dispensary on the south side of Chicago, Mission Dispensary, which was originally black-owned. Turns out though, the day that they were granted their license was the same day the phone calls started rolling in with $1 million offers. And there is no law stopping social equity licensees from selling off their license to non-social equity buyers. When Mission Dispensary opened up as a legal med shop, they almost immediately began operating at a loss. High taxes and a legacy market that pulls in $6 billion versus the legal market at $2 billion makes it incredibly difficult for any company, let alone a solo entrepreneur. Once these licenses are sold off, the new owners are almost always not people from these communities, so the money flow doesn't get put back into these communities, but are instead siphoned off to grow the company in state or expand out of state. Mission Dispensary was bought out by white owners with the launch of the recreational market. Without a rec market, you're inviting top legacy competition to crush the med market. We instantly see how things flip when rec opens up, the Mission Dispensary pulling in 6 times its normal sales during the first day of making rec available to the public. In fact, it wasn't until last month, February 2023, that Chicago's first independent black-owned dispensary launched in Logan Square. The Grasshopper Club is a family-owned business with 2 brothers and their mother running the business. Because one of the brothers, Chuck Brewer, was arrested for possession, he was given the opportunity for licensing. Chuck says he wants to support other African Americans to open more independent dispensaries. However, he points out that many African Americans don't have the funds to even enter the market with social equity in the first place. More support, guidance, leadership, and networking is needed to help independent black entrepreneurs to have level footing to launch a business. And by the way, the Grasshopper Club is located in a 1920s bank building in the 2500 block of North Milwaukee Avenue. Tell them LMC sent you. Also, before we go on, I just want to thank our friends over at GetSeedsRightHere.com. Get 10% off your entire order at GetSeedsRightHere.com by using my code LMC10 at checkout. Get high quality clones and seeds at GetSeedsRightHere.com. Now let's jump back into the video. So, it should be noted that as of right now, even with a limit of 10 licenses per company, only 7 companies control more than half of all the dispensaries in Illinois. Only 18 companies have been granted grow licenses, and this has played into Illinois' higher legal market prices with low supply and high demand. However, with Missouri's market opening up, buyers have already noticed a pricing difference by driving downstate for their purchases instead. Perhaps as we see more of the surrounding states competing, Illinois will start to reposition itself in the overall market to accommodate legacy market buyers. And in a lot of ways, I think that the folks in Illinois need to realize that the illicit market is going to continue to boom. The streets are going to continue to serve most of the population in Illinois because the prices are so high. What these greedy people and these greedy policymakers and big corporations don't realize is that their greed is going to be their undoing, at least to a certain degree. I mean, just look at California, right? So if you're in Illinois or you're in Chicago, use the streets to your advantage. If you're a small, aspiring flower entrepreneur, use the streets to your advantage. Build your brand, because really it's there for the taking. The streets are wide open, right? Just obviously move the right way. And until then, right, we are going to likely continue to see newly independent owned businesses, especially social equity entrepreneurs, continue to struggle and get bought out by larger corporations, right? And of course, these are just my thoughts. Definitely let us know your opinions in the comments, and check out this insane situation that's going on in New York. We got multiple different videos. You can also check out the situation that's going on in Atlanta. We just put a video out about Oklahoma, so make sure to go peep all those videos. Anyways, please make sure to follow me on all the socials, join the Discord, follow on Twitter, Instagram, and all of the other platforms. The links are down below in the description. Big shouts out to everyone in Chicago and the overall state of Illinois. I can't wait to visit out there soon, and don't hesitate to tap in with your boy via email or DM. Anyways, this is LMC signing out. Usually when we think of smuggling here in the US, we think of countries like Colombia, Mexico, or Cuba. But today, in the middle of America, possibly the deepest infiltration of foreign smuggling has been developed through Oklahoma's medical market. It's not the Cubans, it's not the Colombians, well, it's the Chinese. Welcome to this Traptree High Design History episode. This is LMC. Make sure to hit the like button. Follow me on all the socials. Links are down below in the description. Let's run it. So in China, flower is illegal to the level that you'll be sentenced even if they found out you partook in another country, whether it was legal or not. However, exceptions are made with hundreds of acres of legal flower set for exporting. This is similar to countries like Uganda, which we'll be covering in our Africa Trappers video, which is coming out soon. Overall though, Asia and Africa produce the most flower on the planet, but their populations consume the least due to strictly enforced laws and traditional, Western propaganda. Now, still, China produces more than half of the world's hemp supply. And with China's recent CBD boom, some US companies have jumped to partner to produce in China and export back to the US. Now, however, it's been suspected that there's been a willing blindness for the Chinese government to allow or even encourage illicit activity in countries like the US and Canada, where they can operate inside of these legalized markets to disguise their illicit flower operations. A sting operation in 2019 named Asian Pride was the biggest illicit flower bust in the history of Colorado. However, the 4,000 pounds that they had confiscated was only a drop in the bucket from this potential thousands of illegal grow operations throughout the state. A side effect from this has been an increase in land prices and water being diverted from native homes and farms during bad droughts. It turns out large plots of Navajo land had been bought up by the Chinese, who came in under the guise of economic developers in the industry. However, after the deals were made, the land was converted to illicit grow operations with armed guards. Now, in Oklahoma, there has been a magnification of this issue. After legalizing medical use in 2018, by 2020, Oklahoma already had more business licensed than any other state in America. More than California, who legalized medical back in '96, more than Colorado, who was the first to legalize rec back in 2012, including Washington State, more than all of them. And with this has come the crown as the #1 illicit market supplier of flower in the US. How does a traditionally red state with one of the highest prison populations for flower become the central illicit hub for the very same thing? Well, Oklahoma imprisons more people per capita than all other states except for Louisiana. Mississippi is third, and many of those imprisoned are nonviolent offenders. Even after legalization in 2021, Oklahoma arrested and jailed over 4,500 of its citizens for simply possessing small personal amounts of flower. However, with medical legalization, Oklahoma created legislation that was previously untested in any of the markets that have come before it. Time and time again, we see that announcing a medical market without recreational is literally the green light for illicit and gray market operations. This also even applies to states that launch their recreational market without allocating the proper number of licenses for businesses to launch operations. The point is, when you create a legal market without being able to supply its demand, you're inviting others to fill those gaps. However, with Oklahoma's legislation, they actually over-delivered on the supply. There are zero limits on the number of business licenses available. Until pretty recently, actually, they just capped this. Now, I think they're going to stop allowing for business license or for cultivation licenses in Oklahoma, because I think they're going to be going recreational here soon. But the license itself, it only cost $2,500, which was good, right? It's a low barrier to entry. But meanwhile, next door in Arkansas, it'll ring up to about $100,000 for a license, and those are still pretty far and few, to come by. The land, though, the building materials, and the energy for operation in Oklahoma is all affordable enough to be able to start up with a small business loan or even just your credit card. Plus, Oklahoma cities are restricted from banning these shops from operating in their town. Right now in cities like Okmulgee, with a population of not even 12,000 people, they have almost a dozen different dispensaries, including a 24-hour self-automated service one. That's one shop for every 1,000 people, right? The city of Audemars tops with the one dispo for every 700 people, right? In Oklahoma City, I think it's about 862 people per dispensary. Now, let's just let that sink in, right? Oklahoma has been granted licensing to over 9,000 different businesses, 2,000 dispensaries, and 6,000 grow operations statewide. And there's one licensed dispo for every 150 Oklahoma med patients. Now, Colorado, the first recreational market, has almost 50% more people with barely half the number of licensed dispensaries and only 20% of Oklahoma's licensed grow ops. That being said, Oklahoma also has developed the largest medical market per capita with almost 10% of its population enrolled, which is pretty nuts, right? I think it's about 4.5 million people in the state of Oklahoma, and I think there's about 400,000 or so medical patients. Now, it's no wonder, though, that when you get a med card consultation, it's only $60 and 5-minute chat, basically saying that you just want the card. Lawmakers during the legislation decided it would make sense to have unlimited licensing to fully allow capitalism to play out in the market, which I definitely agree with. You know what I also do agree with as well? Well, make sure to go check out my friends over at getseedsrighthere.com. Use my discount code LMC10, get 10% off your entire order. And trust me, go peep with my friends over at getseedsrighthere.com and use my code LMC10. Now let's jump back into it. So, as I mentioned, the city of Ardmore on the border of Texas has a 70% white population. Meanwhile, a vast number of operators in the flower industry are of Asian descent. Some feel this is raising race tensions in the community. Some realtors have had to remind some landowners who were not wanting to sell to Asian buyers that this was illegal and to be careful in avoiding a lawsuit. Overall, realtors have claimed 20% of their business is now contributed from selling properties for the flower market, with dedicated 420 listings on their websites. Prices are up around 40%, with anything below a $500,000 selling in 30 days or less. This is, of course, competing with home buyers who see pricing increasing in a market that isn't slowing. And many of these buyers are out of state looking to take their claim in Oklahoma's green rush. Now, it is pretty crazy too. I want to notice that I've been privy to some inside information, and I was told that anywhere from 70 to 80% of all licenses in the state of Oklahoma are owned by foreigners, which is pretty wild to think about. Now, like I said, I was told that number. I can't officially confirm that. But if that's even halfway true, that's pretty insane. However, government records of who owns what appears to be purposely mismatched with foreign-owned property showing up under different names, or not showing up at all. In the past 2 years, Oklahoma has shut down over 800 medical farms tied to organized crime. Remember, Colorado's big Asian pride bust that seized over 4,000 units? Well, Oklahoma seized over 600,000 units with over 100 arrests in each of its 2 last years, 2021 and 2022. In addition to the unlimited number of dispensaries and farms, there are 0 restrictions on the amount you're allowed to sell or produce. And with Oklahoma centrally located in the country, these rules have allowed it to become the ultimate trap destination for anyone with a dollar and illicit dreams. And going back to the positioning, obviously, it being right next to Texas, which is a massive market, it is perfectly positioned, and they have been flooding the United States. Oklahoma has been one of the big contributors alongside with California for the pricing that's going on right now. Now, the state requires that in Oklahoma, it requires at least 75% of the ownership to be, held by an Oklahoma resident. So the workaround we're seeing is organizations using their networks to obtain licensing without their true identities being revealed. It's suspected that some of these organizations could be tied back to organized crime roots in countries like China, Mexico, and Bulgaria, but it hasn't been fully established in court. Either way, almost all of the flower grown in the state ends up in other states, in other illicit markets. The reality is the illicit market was in full swing and ready to go in November 2018 for medical legalization. It was literally impossible for licensed cultivators to produce the crops that were somehow available in fully stocked dispensaries across the state. This meant that many legal stores automatically entered in the gray market, whether they knew it or not. One of the ways we know for sure that led to Oklahoma's current situation was the contribution of predatory lawyers looking to convince foreigners with low English speaking skills to join the green rush with poor legal advice, and for business owners who ultimately ended up struggling or failing altogether. Jones Brown, a small law firm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, historically focused on personal injury and labor law, but had more recently transitioned into the flower industry licensing. Typically, there was a 2-year wait period for required Oklahoma residencies, but however, word got around that the team over at Jones Brown had you covered. They could get, a little workaround. The process would take you through the firm's secretary, Kathleen Windler, to stand in as your Oklahoma's resident and primary owner of the license with no decision-making authority in the business. With a little fee under $12,000, you would receive your registration number for the Oklahoma Bureau of Dangerous Substances just a year later. So this is exactly what Zai Fu Zhang did when he sold all of his belongings, borrowed money from his family in China, and moved to Walatika in Ahoskie County, Oklahoma. Apologies for the mispronunciation, but he leased, when he got there, 22 acres of land and invested $120,000 into dozens of greenhouses. Unfortunately for Zai, Windler's arrest would lead to over 300 businesses getting shut down in one day, because this is their little workaround that they did. Technically, her name was on all of these different different licenses, and so that all got upended. However, both Zai and Windler and the others are suing the Jones Brown law firm, all claiming they received improper legal advice from their attorneys. Ahoskie County District Court Judge Lawrence Parrish has been sympathetic after hearing their claims, granting a temporary restraining order to block any state officials from closing operations or destroying the company property of these businesses. But as you can see, there's a lot of funny business going on, right? Now, Governor Kevin Stitt wants to keep the adult use off the table until federal legalization arrives. Until then, he made it illegal for Chinese foreign nationals to solely own agricultural or farmland. Recently, the state denied State Question 820, which would have legalized recreational flower, right? Now, there are regrets throughout the community about how the medical market has been handled, with great fear for how recreational market is going to turn out here in the future. The Protect Our Kids number 820 campaign set out to convince the community that saying no to State Question 820 would protect their kids, limit organized crime, and keep mental health in check by not allowing more access for people. Now, newly elected Oklahoma Attorney General Gettner Drummond wants to keep things the way they are. at least in terms of not opening the adult use market. He believes, quote, "It would be a grave mistake to give these criminals a larger market to serve," end quote. But did Oklahoma just accomplish the opposite of what they wanted by saying no to State Question 820, which would legalize it recreationally? Well, let's dig into that exactly. What State Question 820 is and does, or would have done, I should say. In 2020, it only took 10 months for Oklahoma to generate more state and local tax revenue than their entire state lottery over the course of that same year. In fact, the state lottery doesn't even pull in three quarters of what the med market does. This would pale in comparison to opening the rec market. Now, the overall state budget in Oklahoma is $8 billion, but the med market isn't even generating a quarter of $1 billion. However, State Question 820 would bump the 7% med tax up to 15% for rec, providing nearly $500 million in additional tax revenue. And this would have been broken down into 5 distinct beneficial categories that actually acknowledged everything the Protect Our Kids number 820 campaign tried to promote. In fact, it would have financed all aspects of the campaign's goals. 30% of designated for school programs to prevent substance abuse, another 20% for addiction programs, and 30% for the general state funding, with 10% directly for local government and municipalities, with 10% to the courts, which would have been even less cases with broader legalization. Basically, State Question 820 would have provided the funds needed to begin correcting the problems in the market, in addition to growing the size of the legal market altogether. But those are our politicians. Typically, they get this stuff wrong. But these are the types of funds that could be used to beef up the Oklahoma Medical Authority, or OMA. They recently more than doubled their staff, which totaled less than 200 personnel. Still, the 62 investigators and other compliance officers they have added, they are moving in for more enforceable direct action in the industry, which is going to be good to see. Right? They even hired 6 criminal investigators to work directly with the Oklahoma's Bureau of Substances to help with investigations. That would be, an implementation of a dedicated seed to sale tracking system, which has been made a top priority. This would detail where products have been produced, transported, and sold. Originally, Oklahoma business owners were wary of being forced to send the money to adopt systems like Metric, which is the industry standard for digitally and physically tracking flower products across the state. Metric we got a video on Metric coming here soon, but now, what started as hesitation has now turned into full-blown frustration with the delay of its implementation. But I want to say that you definitely will not have any frustration if you go over and check out my friends getseedsrighthere.com. Use my discount code LMC10 to get 10% off your entire order. Trust me, you will not be frustrated. Also, every Friday, getseedsrighthere.com offers amazing deals on clones, so go check it out. Anyways, use my discount code LMC10 to get 10% off your entire order at getseedsrighthere.com. Now, in conclusion, as of now, Oklahoma is sustaining the black market customer and producer base at its peak due to having a legal medical market with no limitations on growing or selling, while having limitations on who can purchase, not to mention it's still federally illegal. So Oklahoma, being centrally located, is nestled perfectly in a region to evenly distribute across all states, legal or not. And like I said, it's right next to Texas. It's really the gateway into the South, into the southern markets, right? And because of that low barrier to entry, it just attracted a lot of different people, a lot of different growers, and that also included, different organized crime groups, right? So the goal should be to eliminate bad actors from entering the market instead of restricting your citizens from purchasing what they are trying to demand, or what the product is in demand for. The bad actors will continue to supply them until the supply is more readily available elsewhere. It doesn't make sense to stop your citizens from purchasing legal flower by having only a medical market. Until then, I believe that Oklahoma has perfected the gourmet recipe for black market trappers. But of course, this is only my opinion. You gotta let me know your opinions down below in the comments. And definitely check out our High Designs Trap Tree series episodes. We've covered Seattle, Atlanta, New York, and we got a bunch more of these coming. Would love to hear your opinions, guys. And what other cities, regions do you want us to cover? Would love to hear it all down below in the comments. We got a lot of dope content coming here
very soon. But please make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Make sure to follow me on all social medias. This is another Trap Tree High Design History episode. I hope you enjoyed. Shout out to everyone in Oklahoma. Mad love. Anyways, this is LMC signing out.